just like to read from the book of 1 Peter. All of you serve each other in humility, for God opposes the proud but favours the humble. So humble yourselves under the mighty power of God, and at the right time he will lift you up in honour. Give all your worries and cares to God, for he cares about you. Let's pray. Father God, we do thank you that you care about us. Thank you, Lord, for all these folk here today. Thank you, Lord, for your message that humility is one of your prized, one of the prized things that you look for in people. And thank you for your promise that when people act in humility, you will honour them. And we just pray, therefore, Lord, that as we come together tonight, whether we be the mayor, whether we be elected councillors, council officers, whether we be chaplains, members of the public, the press, whatever we're doing, Lord, may we do it in humility, serving you. And Father, we pray that in so doing, not only will you bring honour to us, but you'll bring honour to our town. Amen.
Please sit down, and now Mr. Cadbury is going to do the talk of the day.
Oh, sorry. Good evening. It's not working. Mr. Mayor, ladies and gentlemen, councillors, I would like to thank you on behalf of our Muslim group in Basingstoke, and also the multicultural communities that we have got. It's almost 30 communities we have got, and between us we speak 77 languages. I'd like to thank you very much for all the help you have given us and the guidance you have given us, and I hope to be working with you when you will have more time for us as well. So thank you very much indeed. Councillors, thank you.
Fire evacuation. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the rear of this room. Go down the back stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. To receive apologies for absence. Yes, Councillor James.
Mr. Mayor, apologies for Councillor Hussey and Councillor Gurdon. Councillor Day is on his way.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Laura James.
Councillor Wardridge will be late.
Yep. Noted. Declaration of interest. Oh, Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We are expecting Councillor Cherish. I think she's on her way, hopefully.
Thank you. Declaration of interest. Councillor Jones.
So I declare peculiar interest in Many Down and BasingstokeGov.
Councillor Marks.
I'm advised to have an interest in the local plan, so I'll be leaving the chamber.
Councillor Finney.
In respect to the local plan and in respect of the motion on grant funding, I want to declare an interest, and I will withdraw from both debates.
Thank you. Any others? No.
Mrs. Reid.
Oh, Councillor Terry Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On grant funding, I am on the Pro-Chiefs board, but I'm not an officer on there, so I assume that I'm okay to continue with the vote.
Yeah, it is wise to declare an interest.
I'm the borough representative on the Pro-Chiefs board.
That's okay.
That's fine.
Yep.
Yeah. Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Following that clarification, then I should declare that I'm this council's appointed representative to Fairfields Arts Centre, defunct as it is now, but under the grants motion debate.
Yeah, Councillor Dan Taylor.
Thank you. In line with others, I'm the borough representative on the board of Carl of the Arts. Thank you.
That's okay. Councillor Lee.
Following the same lines, I'm the borough's nominee on the anvil. Thank you.
That's okay. Thank you. Thank you. It's all noted. Now we come to, councillors, we come to confirm the minutes held on the 27th of February 2014. Is that agreed? Agreed. To receive announcements. I have got one announcement. The villages of Overton and Kingsclere have featured in a national magazine in the top 50 most attractive places to live for commuters traveling to London. Now, I would like to, our chief executive has got no announcement to make. I would like to invite Councillor Robert Taylor and followed by Councillor Tony Jones, both who wish to speak briefly regarding a collection of donations from councillors to a flood relief fund following the unprecedented recent weather and consequently the flooding in the borough. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All members will be aware of the devastation brought to the lives of many Buckskin residents by the unprecedented floods over the past many weeks. The statistics alone tell a very graphic story. 87 homes evacuated, many more under threat of flooding, millions of litres of contaminated groundwater tankered away from their locality. Thousands of hours devoted to this crisis by our officers and those of the County Council and other agencies. Upheaval and displacement of many people. Donations of food and essential items made by many individuals and organisations. Beyond the statistics, the impact on the lives of many already vulnerable residents has been profound in terms of distress, disruption, uncertainty and heartache. Added to all of this has been the loss of personal possessions and belongings as a result of floodwater pouring into their homes, causing damage to furniture, carpets, flooring, white goods. In addition, their properties themselves now need extensive repairs to make them fit for habitation again. The spirit of the residents has been tremendous throughout this ordeal. The community has come together. Some have freely devoted their time day after day to provide comfort and support, like all those who have volunteered at the Ridgeway Community Centre. And it has not just been those who have a formal part to play, like the Community Centre Coordinator and the Chairman of the Residents Association. Others have rallied round and found ways to help that have had a direct impact on individual and general circumstances. Our officers have played a superb and very significant lead role, giving advice, guidance and support on a daily basis, in addition to outstanding and relentless work, hard work on the ground and behind the scenes. Sovereign Housing Association has done some sterling work. Residents, this council and others have been tested in terms of action and response, and all have shown resilience, a sense of unity of purpose, and have faced up to this event in a magnificent way. As the critical stages are hopefully passing, the next phase will be the rebuilding of disrupted lives and damaged homes. People would need financial help to get back on their feet, replace lost vital possessions and put their lives back into some sort of order. There have already been many donations from many sources, both individual and contributions from local organisations. The Basingstoke Buckskin Flood Relief Fund has been established under the auspices of Buckskin Evangelical Church and has been instrumental in very quickly building a relief fund that currently stands at just less than £18,000. Many local businesses have either donated already or are in the process of being approached to help. I am confident that this will bring about an even greater compassionate response, like those who have given so generously already. This has been an unprecedented natural disaster, one that we hope will never be experienced again. As such, an unprecedented response is called for. It is not normal for the members of this council to be asked to make a contribution themselves. However, kind words, generous thoughts and best wishes, as important as such expressions of solidarity are, they will not help to replace lost or damaged essential possessions. Many residents have not been able to afford insurance and as such are in an exceptionally vulnerable and disadvantaged position as they try to rebuild their lives. I am asking this evening that all members help in a real and direct way by making a personal donation to the funds already being built. I have asked the Mayor to consider accepting the collection and presenting it on our behalf in his name to the Flood Relief Fund. I think all our residents would recognise this gesture as an example of real compassion towards our most vulnerable citizens from us, their elected representatives. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Mayor. Obviously, I support that 100%, but I'm not going to go over the same thing we've just been talking about. I'll just give you a broad outline of what's been happening to the actual people out there. You know, we all see the floods on the television, and a lot of these councils around here have been down to the flooded area in Buckskin. But when you actually see the families, you know, it actually resonates with you. You know, what would you do? You know, and some of these people have really turned some of these places in Buckskin into really nice houses. They've been there for years, you know, and then suddenly it's all fallen to pieces. As we were saying, a lot of these people can't afford the insurance, and I think that may be a problem in years in the future because of the way insurance works. The ones who do have insurance, because their claims will go up. But what we need to do is make sure we've got enough money. You know, we talk 18,000, it seems a lot of money, but when you look at how many people, how much goods are needed, I know Sean's just dealt with someone today, they've just replaced bedding, white goods, things like that. It's just one house and you're talking, you know, hundreds of pounds. And what I'd say is please give as much as you possibly could and let people know in your wards that it isn't all over and we need support. And I know the community itself would be well pleased that the councillors are contributing. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I have got no public participation. Now, resignation. Yes, Councillor West, what is it? Point of order, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for allowing me to make this point of order. Mr. Mayor, on the 24th of March in the morning, a member of the public, Mr. Robert Blay of Church Street, Basingstoke.
Constitution are you?
I am referring to the right of a member of the public to ask a question at full council in accordance with FCPR 3.10.
Yes, okay, carry on.
This email was duly sent and recorded as sent prior to the noon deadline. It is with regret that due to the sensitivity of this email and the importance of it, that this member of the public was presented from making his question, and he is in the public gallery tonight, the question pertaining to an alleged collusion in car parking pricing between Festival Place and the Borough Council car parks. Mr. Mayor, can I ask you on what grounds Mr. Blay was refused permission to speak from the gallery and ask a question this evening? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Chief Executive.
Mr. Mayor, I only became aware of this very shortly before the full council meeting. My understanding is that the email was not, according to our records, received in the Borough Council offices, and therefore we did not have any prior notice of the question by the noon Tuesday deadline for the receipt of questions. What we have said is that we are very happy to receive the question, if the email is sent afresh, and we will forward it to the relevant portfolio holder so that the question that was posed in the email that we didn't receive can be answered. And we await receipt of that, and the officers will ensure that it is processed. Oh, it has now been received and passed on, so that will be done, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
I'm grateful to the Chief Executive for that explanation, although I am quite disappointed that it wasn't received, given the fact that I have a full track and trace of that particular email. I hope that this particular issue will be dealt with, and I would like the results, obviously, to be made public, and thank you very much.
Yes, Councillor West
for
will
that.
do that. Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Now, resignation and appointment.
Thank you, Julie.
As set out on Appendix B. No?
Any nominations? No resignations, no appointments. Any nominations? None. Okay, move on.
No. So petition, I have received none. Now, report to the council. Is that the new council constitution? Is it all agreed? Great. Now, the next one is community governance review, Appendix D. Is that agreed? Agreed.
Okay.
Now,
item 10.
Item 10 is Human Resources held on 10th of March 2014. Can I invite Councillor West?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Very briefly, the council seeks to position its... Pardon? Excuse me? Right. This report sets out the pay policy statement for 2014-2015. With regards to the pay policy statement, the Localism Act requires each local authority to produce a pay policy statement explaining its approach to the pay of its chief officers, its lowest paid employees, and the relationship between the two. This statement must be adopted by full council by law. It must also be produced for the financial year and be reviewed annually. The pay policy statement presented within this report is for 2014-2015. The Human Resources Committee recommends to full council that the pay policy statement is adopted. Thank you.
Councillor Keating, Councillor Gordon.
Councillor Keating.
Oh, yes, we'll come back to that.
This is my annual contribution on this particular item, Mr. Mayor. And I will continue to make my contribution until such time as the facts are outlined in a straightforward way. This particular pay policy statement does not give a very simple, clear outline of the highest paid versus the lower paid. The lower paid have been hived off and put into a footnote. Now, at least last year, they didn't even get to the footnote. So we're actually making some progress. The reality is the low paid in Basingstoke and Deanborough Council employee, the lowest paid are the apprentices. To suggest that they're not employees is wrong. To consider them as such second-class employees as to relegate them to a footnote is also wrong and is designed and intended to distort the facts. This particular list of the highest and lowest is wrong because it does not show the lowest as the apprentices. And I believe we should be upfront, open, and above board with all of these things. We have to do this pay policy statement in accordance with a Tory government rule. And if we do it wrong, or if we hide many of the facts, then I believe we are not being upfront with the public. We have nothing to be ashamed of. We're not doing anything wrong. in terms of our policy of employing people, and we're not doing anything wrong in terms of having apprentices. What we are doing wrong is pretending that they're not the lowest paid. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I hope that it will be rejected on the basis that it is misleading and improved next year. I shall see you then.
Councillor Laura James.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At the last council meeting, I spoke about the growing inequality in Basingstoke. This paper is for noting, and I respect that. But what it tells us is important. The page is not numbered, but on the last page of Appendix E, there is a table that shows the ratio of the median pay for all employees and the remuneration for the chief executive. The ratio between shown on the page is 5.1, meaning that you have 5 and a bit medium salaries to one chief executive. Last year, the figure was 4.9, which shows us what this shows us is that the gap is widening, and widening for 2 reasons. The chief executive's salary is increased, but at the same time, the medium salary has reduced, and in the last year, it has reduced by just over £1,000. This is the fact that concerns me. If we look across the whole of the borough, we see the same thing happening. Figures came to the Housing and Environment Committee recently showed that housing income in Basingstoke, on average, had dropped by £2,500 in the last 2 years. That is a 7% reduction. The lowest paid 25% in Basingstoke have seen their incomes fall on average by 14% in the last 2 years. We're also told that the number of people earning less than £20,000 per year in the borough has risen from 1 in 5 to 1 in 4. What matters here is the example that we set as a council through what we pay our employees. We are beginning to see the growth in inequality of pay inside this council, and that is what concerns me and the Labour group.
Thank you. Have we got a seconder for this? Councillor. Yeah? That's, yeah, that's noted. Yeah? Does everyone agree because it is for approving? Agreed. Thank you.
So vote those 4.
All those 4? Councillor Keating? That's clearly carried.
Those against?
Those against? Yeah? Councillor Keating.
Councillor Bierman.
Yes, Councillor Bierman.
Mr. Mayor, I think it's a point of order. I have a difficulty because before we moved on to this agenda item, I was slightly distracted by my colleague here saying what happened to the public participation that's on the yellow sheet. Because it says there, and I don't remember, I mean, it was said by yourself there is no public participation, so something's happened to what's on the yellow sheet. That was one question. The other question, in relation to that moment when I was distracted, was you'd got the reports to council. I thought you were taking a vote on item 1 under that. I don't remember you taking a vote on item 2 because they are 2 separate issues. Well, if you did, I'm sorry I was distracted, but if you did...
Thank you, Councillor Bierman. Our Chief Executive is going to answer to both.
Mr. Mayor, on the first item, item 6, public participation, Mr. Stone withdrew his question before the meeting commenced. So it was withdrawn. And I can confirm, Mr. Mayor, that you did separately put item 191 and then item 2 to the members and sought agreement on both items and had agreement by acclaim on both items. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Now we come to item 10, number 2. Councillor Golding.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is good news. The recommendation asks Council to approve the release of the balance of the Affordable Housing Reserve, some 634,000, to fund the purchase of affordable housing by Sentinel Housing Association. The money will be used to support the purchase of about 17 properties. The Council would then have nomination rights so we can use the houses to provide temporary accommodation for families who would otherwise be placed into bed and breakfast. Sentinel will be putting in a lot of their own money, so that we will be funding only about 22% of the cost of each house. The arrangement agreed with Sentinel is that the funding will be made available for 10 years. At the end of that period, the funding can be returned with our proportionate share of any increase in the value of the properties. We will also benefit from reduced expenditure on bed and breakfast accommodation. However, Mr. Mayor, while those are very valuable benefits to the Council, the main benefit from this proposal is that it would enable us to move homeless families straight into suitable housing rather than being forced to put them into bed and breakfast for an extended period. We expect this arrangement to be a success. Sentinel have already shown that they can use funding from the Affordable Housing Reserve together with their own funding to acquire suitable existing properties to use as affordable housing. The first exercise involved the purchase of dwellings for tenants who needed to downsize. This much larger exercise is to acquire houses for use as temporary accommodation. Because we expect it to be a success, we will review progress in September and come back to Council if there's a good case for further funding. I commend this proposal to Council.
Is that seconded? Yes. Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly I welcome this measure being taken. And I'm also pleased to see when reading the papers that there's a potential new player coming on the scene as far as provision of housing for this authority. For some time I've rather felt that we're lacking some competition in this particular field. But let's be certain that this is only going to be a measure that's perhaps going to assist us only to tread water, because of the worrying, alarming increase in the number of homeless families registered in the last 12 months. And I would consider this as going to be an increasing trend. I do hope that we can find other measures to put in place to relieve the anxiety and the stress that these families suffer at a time when they are rendered homeless. So I do want to say a good congratulations to officers for putting this all together. I think it's a very positive measure, but I think it needs to be noted that it's possibly going to be needed to be supported by further measures in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Woolridge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Whilst I welcome any measures which are going to alleviate the crisis that we have of temporary accommodation, not only in this council but throughout the country, what I would say is that I am aware that there was about a decade ago a substantial amount of temporary accommodation in this borough, and I think it's only over the last 3 or 4 years that this temporary accommodation has been converted into permanent accommodation. And whilst I do welcome anything that's going to bring more temporary accommodation right now, and I am aware that this is a measure which was previously brought in under the previous administration, and then this accommodation got converted. And so I'd just like to point out this, that what happened to that temporary accommodation? Why was it converted to permanent accommodation if we were going to need it again as temporary accommodation? And also, reiteration what's said at this side here. What I would say is that these properties, whilst welcome, are sort of taken away from first-time buyer potential properties, which arguably, I would much prefer that we were building our own new temporary accommodation rather than relying on properties which, could be used for, a cheaper accommodation, which could be used for other people trying to get into the market for the first time. So, whilst welcome, I think we can't. I don't want to over-congratulate this policy. So, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
We'll be quick because most of it's been said. It was when I was portfolio holder. That's one of the things I did introduce. But I'd like to know where the temporary accommodation has gone to, which we bought those years ago. I do support it. I think it's a good idea. There is obviously drawbacks when you're talking about buying houses out of the market, especially the sort of houses we're talking about is the low end, and therefore it does stop first-time buyers as well. So we've got to be very careful the way we do this. But I do support the thing, but I would like to just say to the portfolio holder to talk to the housing associations to make sure that they keep this accommodation for people who are homeless. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that
Golding wants to sum up?
Councillor Golding, would you like to sum up?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am unable to give a precise answer as to when the previous temporary accommodation became permanent accommodation. I think it was rather longer ago than 4 years, but if members opposite are interested, I will get officers to provide a precise answer. The reason why it was no longer kept as temporary accommodation was that back in happier times, when there were 300 plus new affordable dwellings becoming available each year, we didn't need temporary accommodation because we could house homeless families straight into permanent accommodation. As I explained at Housing and Environment overview the other night, we are confidently predicting that by 2015-16 we'll be back to those sort of levels, given the number of planning permissions that have been granted in recent time, and even allowing for some of those falling by the wayside or being delayed. So it may come again that we will not need temporary accommodation, but it would be our decision, whoever was responsible at the time, that it was no longer needed as temporary accommodation. But we certainly need it for the foreseeable future. And as I said, this is a 10-year plan. So if I will try and get an answer to when the previous lot was turned from temporary to permanent, but it was because we no longer needed it as temporary. Thank you. And I commend this to the council.
Thank you. Is that agreed? Great, thank you. Now we come to the changes to Basingstoke and Dean pre-submission local plan. Councillor Raphael.
Mr. Mayor, before I say anything, may I first of all formally propose these recommendations and ask for a seconder? Thank you, and perhaps the clock can start again. Thank you. Mr. Mayor, history does repeat itself. We have Russia grabbing land when it suits its own political needs. We have the European Union talking tough but being completely ineffectual in response. And we have a Conservative-led coalition government clearing up the mess caused by a previous Labour government. And sadly, for the second year in a row, we have Tottenham Hotspur not quite making the fourth position in the Premiership. History does repeat itself, and it does in Basingstoke and Dean. Here I stand again asking you to confirm the launch of our local plan, amended after consultation and ready for further consultation and inspection. Once again, I have to thank councillors from all parties and none for their constructive contributions. And history will repeat itself again tonight. There will be some who will stand up and urge that we stop because their ward is adversely affected. There will be others who will tell us that we ought not to be where we are now, and therefore, because we are where we are now, then they cannot support the plan. And there will be the Labour group, who've been great partners in the creation of this plan. Their influence runs through it, but sadly they are very likely to play politics and seek some technical reason to try to defeat it, dressed up as moral outrage or high principle. But I will say this, if I am wrong, and by way of an apology, and the Labour group support the plan, I'll give £10 to the Mayor's charity. But thank goodness for the majority of councillors. Thank goodness for Conservatives, thank goodness for the Liberal Democrats, and thank goodness for some of the independents who will be using their common sense tonight, and reliably so. We are the sensible majority who have put our political differences aside and have come together to create this plan. I would like to thank the officers in particular, and one person in particular, Andrew Hunter, who is in the public gallery listening to this, for all his hard work and for all his team's hard work. He represents many, and they have all worked so hard to put this plan together. Mr. Mayor, I've said it before, but it's worth saying again. We live in a wonderful borough. People want to stay living here once they've grown up here. People from other parts of our country want to live here, and some will want to work here. All of that is good news. Basingstoke-on-Deane is a great place to live and work. We have decided on a housing number based on evidence that takes account of the fact that we cannot stop inward migration to our borough. So in order to cater for our own housing need, we have to build more houses than that need in order to take account of our borough's popularity. We have also looked at how best to develop homes for those who live in our borough but cannot afford a new or existing home at market value. We set a target of 40% affordable homes, which 8 months on, with a more buoyant housing market, looks like a sensible decision to have made. We have had a transport assessment, and substantial improvements will be needed to our road network. I have remained resolute to the will of this council last July that there should be references to a western bypass in the plan. Let me just remind you of the transformation in the policies from our current plan to this new plan. The site policies are now robust and say what we as members want to see. We have a policy on new housing in the countryside that takes account of the views of parish councils. We have a forward-thinking plan on Basing View. We have a new policy of strategic gaps. It gives some comfort to communities worried about development pressures and affected by the sites selected in the plan. We've looked at green infrastructure and supported the draft green infrastructure strategy in its attempts to increase the minimum standards for green spaces for new properties. We have a great policy on commercial renewable energy generation. We now have a straightforward test, impact versus benefit, where impact is specified and benefit is understood. And we have a plan that links properly to our economic strategy and our borough's vision for the future. Mr. Mayor, there are other examples that I could give if only time would allow, but the message is simple. This is a local plan that has been shaped, moulded and tested by us. It is our plan for Basingstoke-on-Deane. It is not a developer's plan, not a landowner's plan, not a civil servant's plan, not a political plan, but an evidence-based plan by Basingstoke-on-Deane for Basingstoke-on-Deane. So I commend it to you, Mr. Mayor, and I urge all councillors, please, please, to approve it again tonight.
Thank you. Councillor Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're all responsible for the good planning of the borough as a whole, and we're each accountable to our electorates for the good planning in our wards. So 4 minutes is inadequate, really, to deal with what we have here. I should just try to make 4 points. Firstly, the change that's not being recommended tonight. I support the decision to retain the target of 748 houses per annum through the life of the plan. It is our objectively assessed number for the need for new housing, but we were advised to increase that after a consultation when we were assailed by rapacious developers and their expensive consultants criticising that. As Councillor Raffel said, we've been well served by the planning policy officers, and it wouldn't be fair to ask them to take the burden of defending our decision. Now, if the portfolio holder is going to attend the examination in public to present and defend this plan, then I will join him and support him in that, because we need all the members of this council to stand together behind good planning for the borough and for our local neighbourhoods. Unfortunately, I suspect that all are not going to support. I've great respect for the Labour councillors, and the members of the Planning and Infrastructure Committee have made useful contributions throughout. I'm particularly grateful to them for their support last year when Councillor Sherlock tried to take us skiing off-piste. But I really regret that, as last July, I suspect the Labour group are going to vote against this and come up with no alternative plan.
I've racked my brains to try and work out why that may be, and I think I've got the answer, Mr. Mayor. I think they're waiting for a Labour government to tell them what to think. Long live the South East Plan. If I may make 2 points pertinent to Whitchurch. There is a change on page 39 of the latest draft, saying measures to mitigate the impact on the local road network should cover the junctions within the town centre. That's very important for Whitchurch, and I'd link that with the requirement in policy C9 that proposals should integrate into existing movement networks. So please support that change. And finally, on the new page 114, there's a statement that other employment sites may be identified through neighbourhood planning, which we very much want in Whitchurch. But that, bringing me to that phrase, neighbourhood planning, this submission of this plan, along with others throughout the country, is a test of this government's commitment to localism. In particular, neighbourhood planning is a very strong part in this plan we're adopting tonight, in terms of allocating housing sites as well as possibly employment sites. And I hope that we do find that when we go to the examination in public and support the work that Basingstoke and Dean has done and what our communities want, that we won't find that the Inspector and the Secretary of State together go against us.
Thank you. Councillor Bierman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I'm going to lead the charge with regret against what the portfolio requested about unanimity, and indeed Councillor Watts. I am elected as a member to serve the whole borough, but to take particular notice of what might be happening up in the area which I represent. And I do want to continue living, as the portfolio holder said, in a wonderful borough. But I'm not relaxed that what is currently in the local plan will continue to provide that, and I fear it's going to undermine it. I talk, of course, specifically about the ongoing proposal for Razors Farm and the inevitable then attachment of Cuffold Farm, and the impact that it will not only have on existing residents in Chinham and Taylor's Farm, but also the torture, and indeed the residents of Bramley for that matter, but also what will be, I believe, a not very healthy or good experience for people moving into those two locations. For a whole host of reasons which I can't rehearse here. So given that those two proposals remain in the plan, I just could not live with my conscience and support it. I will say at the same time, I feel that the removal of half of east of Chinham, and I think everybody knows what I'm talking about there, even though it's misnomered all the time, makes a nonsense site completely detached and segregated from any other housing settlement, just what we said we don't want to have. It's sort of floating around like a balloon on the end of a string, and I feel that that is a very bad move in the wrong direction. So ironically, I'm asking that if that area be developed, it should have more houses, i.e. the whole lot, not just a bit, that will make a nonsense half-baked development. In conclusion, I do have to say that I remain, no, not quite in conclusion, I remain very concerned about the underfunding for roads, and I noticed that in the so-called improvements in our draft to submit, some of the provision for road improvements on the A33 are being removed, or certainly not being specifically specified, an important part of what was in the previous plan. And so that's gone backwards as far as I'm concerned. And lastly, I support the increase in housing numbers, but I say again, I don't believe that they will be sustained at the inquiry, and it would have been much better to have the housing numbers that were being recommended by officers in as our approved draft, rather than have them pushed up by the inspector and then have to scurry around to find extra land to accommodate those extra houses. So I think, though I'm not sort of saying we should build, I think with the economic expansion we want, we need to do some building. The inspector is bound to say you need to have more houses. In my view, he's bound to say, or she, that more houses will be required, and not to put them in at this stage, I think, is probably going to leave us with some greater difficulties at a later stage. So for all those reasons, with regret, because I wish it could be a unanimous and enthusiastic vote at the end, I shall be voting against, and indeed I would like a recorded vote when we get there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Potter.
Well, fairly predictably, I am history repeating itself, and perhaps I can give notice that I will be voting against this draft local plan. And in answer to Councillor Watt's query, perhaps I can try and answer why that's my position on this. Why would I support a draft local plan that isn't supported by the collective, loosely known as the Cabinet? One or two quotes attributable to Cabinet members at its last meeting may interest you. I watched that meeting avidly, and if I may, I'll quote a few. Non-attributable at this stage, may I add, but I will vote against the draft plan. This version is worse. In respect of Manidan, the quotes were, amongst others, no justification to westward extension, contrary to paragraph 112 of the MPPF, contrary to strategic gap policy, I wish this situation never happened, I will support it with qualification, and finally, a quotation, the residents of Buckskin, Winkleberry and Oakley have lost confidence in this council, brackets this administration, my brackets by the way on that. No doubt these expressed views may change this evening, after all they have in the past. I mean, why would they let mere issues of principle come before political ambition? I used to have this old-fashioned view about collective responsibility for Cabinet members. I think it used to apply in this administration. Oh no, I remember now, that was back in the days of Councillor Lane still on the Cabinet. One Cabinet member said that Manidan had become the modus operandi for councillors of other groups. I refute this, speaking for myself, of course. I believe that Manidan is key to the local plan. It always was, and it was always intended to be. Purchased 20 years ago to secure high-quality, affordable housing for the borough. I would have paid tribute to County Councillor Stephen Reid for his vision. He was leader of the Borough Council just prior to the agreement being signed. But as he spent the last decade in denial and seeking to campaign against its inclusion in the local plan, it's difficult to ignore the gerrymandering of the party opposite. No, Mr. Mayor, there are flawed policies in this revised draft local plan that I cannot support. A number of them, very quickly to mention, but not all, include the policy on affordable housing, housing mix, open space, literally to name but three. And I have to say, the prevailing argument that I've heard from members opposite consistently, and I fear elsewhere now, is we must have a local plan and we need something to be adopted. In other words, anything is better than nothing. Well, not for me, Mr. Mayor. I will not support this local plan at this time.
Thank you. Councillor Gavin James.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's interesting that the Labour group take their steer from Cabinet rebels. You'll be pleased to know I've looked at the local plan and taken my own view all by myself without following anybody. Mr. Mayor, like everyone, I can't pretend I'm comfortable with every site. I prefer to see a greater commitment to reducing the impact on our environment with buildings that reduce water usage. I would like to see compulsory solar panels on every roof. And I would hope to have a future-proof development with off-road parking place for every dwelling we build to avoid the parking problems we face in our neighbourhoods today. On large developments, I'd like to see shared utility trenches so we never have to dig up a road or pavement. But I'm a realist. We are never going to create a perfect local plan with so many diverse views on what perfect is. We have a plan that contains many of the things that the public, officers and the members who got involved wanted. But most of all, we have a plan that has hope. It has hope for the thousands on the waiting list that we are trying to build the homes they need. It's hope for those that are currently in our classrooms and colleges that we're planning to build the houses that they will need in the future. And hope for those who fear planning by appeal that we are retaking control of our borough's future. Many dream of having their own home. Many dream of having the right home. This shows we're planning on making it reality. I will be supporting this. I appreciate concerns around what the inspector may say, but I would suggest we submit something to him before he dies, so that he can give us a view, and if we have to come back, we will.
Thank you. Councillor Laura James.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've lived and breathed this local plan for years, and we're seeing communities already threatened with and subject to bad planning. We're here tonight being asked to support this plan going out for consultation. And I'm going to name a councillor here tonight. Councillor Tomlin, when we came into the meeting, was talking about, and I was talking about the amount of plans that we've seen, particularly in P&I, and he commented and said there was almost enough to build a house. I think that's quite interesting, really, and I think he's right. We feel strongly, as a Labour group, that the affordable housing policy is wrong, that the housing mix policy is wrong, that the open space policy is wrong, and that the environmental policies are not strong enough. We said that all of this all the time, and we've consistently said this, and this is our concerns, that the direction of much of the detailed policy that is flowing away from evidence, and that concerns us, and it leaves us vulnerable. Again, I ask the question, for whom are we building houses? We're building a lot of houses. Who are we going to be building them for? This is a flawed plan because the evidence this council has gathered, and we gathered that by employing consultants. As a Labour group, we were opposed to the consultants doing the piece of work, and we were very clear on that. But the administration went ahead and employed the consultants to do the piece of work. And what you're doing tonight is you're ignoring the evidence and the advice of those consultants, and that worries us greatly. And also what worries us is that you're actually going out to the community and consulting with the community, and I think all of us are clear that we have grave concerns that this is vulnerable in inspection, and I think that we need to be honest with the community and tell them that this is vulnerable, and the evidence that we've been given is contrary to what we're actually having this consultation, because they believe that when they're taking part in this consultation, this is the figure and this is what is going to be built. And I think that we need to be much more honest with the community of Basingstoke and Dean, because it's likely, and all of us are quite clear of that when it comes back from the inspector, we're going to require the building of more houses, and that's what the consultant that you purchased with taxpayers' money gave you that advice. They told you that, and you've ignored that advice, and you're going out for consultation on something quite different, and that worries me. And I think that we need to let the community of Basingstoke and Dean know that. This decision is not an easy one. It involves lots of soul searching, but on balance, the Labour group don't agree with much of the plan's policy. And given the opportunity, would we do this again? I wish we could, but we can't. Would we make significant changes? Yes, we would. It doesn't reflect the politics of the Labour group. We clearly have a different politics. It isn't our plan. This is your plan, and it isn't a plan that we would have done. And as I say, would we do something different if we had the opportunity? Yes, we would. We won't have the opportunity, but this is your plan, and it's not the plan that I wish to support.
Thank you. Councillor Leake.
I'm dismayed to see that we've missed the opportunity to provide for the route of a western bypass. I've sat on the Planning and Infrastructure Committee over the past few years and had the impression that there was general support for such a proposal. Although I accept that currently there is no justification for a dual carriageway, I had believed that a single carriageway link road constructed on the western side of the Manydown site, initially from the A339 to the B3400 and subsequently onwards towards junction 7 of the M3, was a realistic alternative. At the 11th hour, that possibility has been taken away. a decision which I understand was taken because it would reduce the profitability of the development. So once again, those who made the strategic decisions have prevailed over the carefully considered recommendations of the democratically elected representatives of the residents. Curious that, isn't it, when we've been told that the reason for owning the site was to provide for the better planning of the area. So what will be the legacy of this decision taken tonight? We will have another spine road through a major development area. And, as I understand it, Roman Road and Roman Way will remain the main route from the A339 to the B3400. Has anyone making these decisions seen the volume of traffic travelling along Roman Road at peak times? Have they then factored in the likely increase when the Manydown development is complete? Do we really want another Popley Way or an Oxford Way, but worse because the proposed new homes will be built up to the edge of the road? From the Worthing Road mini roundabout, the B3400 will pass through the new development to the west of Worthing Village. How will that affect those travelling to Overton, Whitchurch or Oakley? I know the portfolio holder and members of the Cabinet are itching to tell me these issues can be resolved during the development of the so-called master plan, but I believe the die is being cast when we approve the Manydown policy tonight. And then Clause N tells me that in undertaking the master planning, regard shall be had to the potential requirement for a western bypass, quotes, outside of the land allocated for housing. Again, I ask if anyone has looked at a map of the area. I know the area like the back of my hand. I've been a parish councillor for Wootton St Lawrence for 26 years and the ward councillor for 14 years. I can tell you now that it would be impossible to construct such a route without destroying the rural character of Wootton Village or the important heritage assets at Tangier Park. In 2 words, it's a non-starter. There are many good things in the draft local plan, particularly the strategic gap between Sherburn St John and the town of Basingstoke. I like the idea of local and district centres on the Manydown site, which will clearly help the residents in my ward, provided that they can actually get there. And it would have the further advantage that I would not have to mention the attractions of Morrison's again. But overall, we failed to grasp the nettle of the traffic impact on the western side of Basingstoke and on the A339 and the B3400. There was a time when we were all agreed that there should be no more housing without appropriate infrastructure. The latter appears to be missing in this plan. In my view, the lane to Wootton St Lawrence will become a rat run, and I cannot support that nor the draft local plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I listened carefully to the debate this evening from members, and it's interesting, isn't it? Do you accept something that you genuinely feel is the wrong thing, that you accept something because actually we just need something on the books? At the end of the day, we're being faced with speculative developers, and we just have to accept that we need something on the books. Now, that argument has been articulated, and I do disagree with it. I really do. The reason I disagree with it, and it's not because of the reasons the Cabinet member has given, I have every right to hold the views I hold. I have every right to represent my residents in the way their issues reflect, particularly on affordable housing. And I have every right in principle to stand here and argue that. And how dare you tell me I don't? But what I do care about is that you hold your views, and that's fair. Well, so do we hold our views. And when it comes to affordable housing, Mr. Mayor, and I respect what's being said, when it comes to affordable housing, Mr. Mayor, it is an issue. That's why we wanted a higher target. And it does matter who are we building these homes for, because I do ask myself how many people in Basingstoke can afford the houses we're building or will be able to get into the affordable housing. Because the other issue to bear in mind is that so many developers, through their viability arguments, have tried to get out of delivering the affordable housing on site after site after site in this borough. And I don't think the policies come up to scratch on that, and we've articulated that clearly. The open spaces policy, the idea of the minimum, we've debated that. Motions have been recommended from committees to the Cabinet member on that. It's still there, and it's still an issue. The cycling issue, the idea of the transport issues, one line, it's not enough. It really isn't. There's a huge gap in infrastructure funding, a huge gap in infrastructure funding. How are we going to afford the £21 million for the Kent Shop roundabout that's required for mitigation, as given to us as the key by the consultants. And then there's the economic growth bit. We love to talk about economic prosperity, but who is it economic prosperity for? And that's one of the big issues, I think, as a Taoiseach that we have to really grapple with. Who benefits from this economic growth? So bear all that in mind. And the housing mix policy, that's another one. We've argued that, the 2- and 3-bed houses versus flats and the overdevelopment of flats. So I've got every right to disagree, Mr. Mayor. I've got every right to articulate the views that my residents care about, and they do care about affordable housing, but actually affording to living the housing that is then built. And I don't believe this local plan addresses those issues. So I will be voting against it. I don't believe it's the right thing to do. And there are so many issues that have fallen out of this over all these years. And it has been years, has it not? So the real question begs, do you accept something that isn't going to be delivered? You know, the viability argument. If we accept less than 40% on Manydown of affordable housing, when we own that land, it would be a disgraceful thing for this council to do. Absolutely disgraceful. So there are key principles involved in all of this. And I just don't have faith in it at the moment. I genuinely don't. So, Mr. Mayor, the question comes, do you accept something that isn't going to work, that's something that you genuinely believe could be a lot better, or do you just vote for it because you're being threatened by the big developers and we need to have a local plan on the books? And I'm sorry, but my view is I vote against it because I do hold those principles dear.
Thank you. Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There is a sense of deja vu, of course, this evening, and it's the third time I think that we've reached this stage virtually. And I think in many respects it is third time unlucky. I certainly am opposed to some of the trade-offs that have been made in this process by the administration, the removal of some of the requirements that would have been put in place on developers as far as environmental concerns go. The housing mix policy, which if you look at it in the paper that shows the changes, you know, has so many deletions in it that there's pretty little of substance left actually in that particular policy. And something that's particularly dear to my heart is the way in which, you know, the plan will still allow trade-offs in terms of provision of green space, so that when new developments are built, as they have been in my own ward, people will be sold short by off-site provision. They won't get the valuable green space on their own housing estate that I think is something that should justly be theirs by right. So all of those things are wrong with the plan, to put it very bluntly. And of course the plan is you know, in quite a sort of weak state, and the administration itself is in a pretty weak state at this stage of the whole process. You know, it almost seems to be staggering over the line. And it's very clear how disunited the Conservative group is on many of the substantial issues. But it would be wrong not to actually put this plan out for consultation at the moment. It would be, to be perfectly blunt, a betrayal of communities that are threatened by development, and where a failure to actually put a plan forward prolongs and worsens that sense of loss and that risk to those communities. There are those communities already that have had development foisted on them by appeal. And the longer we delay this plan, the greater the number of communities that will be under that threat, the greater the risk of lost appeals. And it's not good enough to sort of say, well, yes, we're opposed to this, and not actually on some of the really substantive issues have a credible proposal. And I listened to what members of the Labour Party said. I heard about principles, strong views and so on. On areas of the local plan, they have expressed strong views, and I give them credit for that. But one of the most significant things, the thing that actually dominates the press and a lot of residents' issues and residents' debates and discussions about the local plan, is the issue of, well, what do we think is actually the right housing number to put forward? What is the right number of houses balancing the environment, economic growth and prosperity? And that the Labour group is not good on maths. not good at maths on this particular issue, and I have yet to hear, and I just hope, against hope, that at a certain stage the Labour Party might actually have the courage of its convictions to actually share with the public and with members of the council exactly what they think is the appropriate level of housing in this borough, because we're yet to hear their views on that critical issues. And Labour's stance on this makes them actually the developers' friend. It makes them the friend of those who seek housing development by appeal to the planning inspector rather than by proposal to the council's development and democratically elected development control committee. So it's deeply disappointing that Labour take the stance that they have at this stage. I shall be voting for the plan this evening. It's critical from the point of view of many communities that we progress this issue. I and others will continue to make the case for stronger environmental controls and requirements, more green space, and more rigour on the housing mix. But we must move forward tonight.
Thank you. Mrs. Baker, Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you know, I've been on this council for a long while, and I find myself in a bit of a philosophical mood this evening and casting my mind back to the previous local plan, which was quite contentious. It was widely consulted on. It was sufficiently contentious that we had to hold a meeting in Queen Mary's College because we needed a room big enough for all of the members of public who wanted to attend and speak to us about the plan. But we got it through, and we took the plan through. And it's been criticised since, but we're a democracy. And that's how I look at this evening's debate. We're here as democratic representatives of our communities. So I would think that if we each went away and wrote our own local plan, we'd probably have 60 different local plans in front of us. Because the one I want isn't the same as the one any of my colleagues would want. But we're here as democratically elected councillors, and we have to look at what is good for the borough as well as what is good for our own wards. So for my own ward, I don't want so much housing in it. As other councillors said, I want far stronger environmental protection in the plan, and I could go on with other issues that in my version of the plan would be different. But we have to operate as a democracy, and we have to accept the fact that that's the way democracy works, that what we end up with is going to be inevitably a compromise. So I would pay tribute to our officers who've had to sit through so many long evenings of us arguing about various sites and the detail of various sites that have been put forward to this plan. And I'm sure they're absolutely sick of hearing me going on about sewerage in Overton. And you all probably are as well. But we have a plan in front of us this evening. And the alternative to that is that we turn around and say to the people of the borough, this is too difficult, we can't do it, we'll let the developers have their own way. I am not prepared to do that, and I would urge you not to do that, because along with the great privilege that we have of being able to stand in this council chamber and speak for our communities,
we have responsibility for those communities as well. And I think tonight is the night when we need to exercise that responsibility. And so, Mr. Mayor, I will be supporting this plan. It's not everything I want, it's not everything I want for my village, but it is better than having no plan. And so I will be supporting it. And my last thought on the subject was with the last local plan, we did manage, in spite of all the arguments we had, to get it through with only one councillor leading what we now call the portfolio. So things have changed rather in that respect, because this hot potato has obviously, as we know, has bounced between several hands during the last couple of years. So obviously, my skin is tougher, and
second.
Or I must have had my oven gloves on when I was holding that portfolio. So yes, it's not everything I want, but I shall support the plan, and I urge others to do so as well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Tilbury.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, it really is déjà vu all over again, isn't it? I mean, when we looked at this last year, I warned at that time, if we went out with the plan as it was, it would fail. It wouldn't even get past the examination stage. And of course, we were right. Why were we right? Because we looked at the facts, and yet we were told then we should have supported the plan that was clearly so bad it's now been completely changed. And we're being told the same again tonight. No, I think Councillor Fellow's done a good job in trying to bring this back on track, and I think I said that last year, but unfortunately the damage has been done a long time before, and we're going to have to live with that now, because this is a 2011 to 2029 plan. I can't help noticing it's 2014 now, isn't it? We're already well into the plan, and the problem is we're running out of sites to build on. It's becoming irrelevant in Overton. We've already had one planning application for the Overton Hill site, which sort of got thrown out on a few technicalities, much to everyone's surprise. But we've already got developers coming forward for other sites. Although we're looking at neighbourhood planning in the village, the chances of that actually happening, it's likely that we'll already have another application. And because of the number of Category 1 sites in the village, the developer who's jumped first is the one who was at the back of the queue, and all the ones who thought they were further up, a bit like Kennel Farm, well, no, they're now all going to pile in, aren't they? So we've already lost control of this, because we're not going to get this plan passed before this time next year. So it's largely irrelevant, no matter what we do, much as I'd like to pass. If I thought we would, if we could vote this through now and it was our plan, because that's what we keep talking about, it's not our plan at the end of the day, it's the planning inspector's plan, because if he decides he doesn't like it, like the last one, and changes things and alters the dates and alters the timescales, then we have no real control over any of this, and this is what the public find quite bizarre. They actually think we have some control over this sort of stuff, because we talk about it a lot, but the reality is some person down in Bristol would probably have more say on our local plan than any of us. I just don't know where to start. I mean, the problem is with part of this that we have a plan that's being driven by economic growth, and that's much more apparent in this latest revised version. It's all about growth, but if you're going to do that, as I've pointed out time and time again, it will create more need for housing. And the officers have told us that, and they've produced reports, and they've got clever people to produce reports as well, and they've all said sort of 806 or 807 or whatever the number is. In fact, the figure I think I put forward last year, saying was a more realistic figure from the other information we had this time last year, but we're going to ignore that, because we want lower housing numbers, but we want higher growth and more people to come and work here. In fact, Mr. Mayor, you made an announcement at the beginning about Overton and Whitchurch. Well, we know that in Overton, because the only people who can afford to live in Overton and probably Whitchurch now are people who do work in London and probably have come from London in the first place. It's quite ironic. First they come down and colonised Basingstoke, but now it's sort of, they seem to be ignoring Basingstoke and jumping over further down and taking over Overton and Whitchurch, because they can sell a little cheap flat in Clapham up there and come and buy a great big house in Overton. But we can't, the people who live down here. And that's the problem I see when we do build these houses. I grew up through the 60s when they were building massive numbers of houses in Overton, nearly all council houses and some private houses. But all those houses went to people I knew who lived in the village. They don't anymore. The work I was doing at Foxstone recently, they're all very nice people, but there was one rather obvious thing I noticed, with the exception of the people who lived in housing association properties, who I did know, all the other people didn't come from this area at all. They're all, they all come here for various reasons to work and such like, but that's the reality. We're building houses across this borough for people from outside the borough. And the people who were on our housing list still stay on our housing list, and they probably still will. I see nothing is going to change. We need to get this plan out to the examination in public, but I think it will go exactly the same way. It will be torn to pieces by everybody. The developers will have a field day. You know, we've already talked about many down. I mean, the same other things. We need a western bypass, but we're sort of told we don't need one. Well, it's all a bit contradictory. We just seem to go round and round in circles. I think it's got to go out to the examination in public and the inspector, but I think it's all too little too late. I think I joked at one previous meeting that we should probably start on the next local plan now and give up on this one. But I think that's actually become more and more of a realistic view, I think. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Gary Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I find it quite extraordinary, Mr. Mayor, that we're being attacked for voting against a plan which we actually don't support. Why would we vote for a plan which contains many policies which we don't support, and a plan which is not going to address the housing needs and the infrastructure deficit which we already have? It's quite extraordinary that we're being attacked by the Liberal Democrats on principle. I mean, they had principles once until they sold out to the devil. But moving to the local plan, I had to get that one in, sorry. The housing mix policy has been changed. This was changed at the last P&I meeting. The reference to 2- and 3-bedroom homes has been dropped, basically because we went out to consultation and developers have come back and said they didn't like our housing mix policy. And the consequences of this policy is we're going to have more 1-bedroom flats within the town. I mean, I haven't come across anybody within the town that actually supports 1-bedroom flats. I really don't see the need for 1-bedroom flats. If we are housing, our housing mix policy should be driven by our housing demand, and show me the evidence if you want more bedroom flats. I have not seen any evidence to come to P&I. What are the consequences of this policy? In Kings Road area in South Ham has been earmarked for regeneration. Very laudable, but after that regeneration, we're going to have an extra net 200 homes on that area. So Kings Road was already a high density area, got flats and some bed sits and a few bungalows. It's going to have even more high density. That is not the policy I could vote for, Mr. Mayor. And also the consultation with residents within the settlement boundary has been a sham. I mean, I haven't come across anybody within the borough that's actually supported the development of Down Grange. Maybe the odd Tory in South Ham might have supported it, but I haven't come across anybody. Even Kempshire councillors are against it. Hundreds of people from South Ham and Kempshire have voted into this council, but it's still there. And we know if it's going to go to a planning application, in the current planning circumstances, we're going to lose that application and Down Grange is going to be built on. So I would urge members to not vote for this local plan because it's still there. The housing numbers, a couple of P&I meetings ago, the council hired consultants and they came out with a higher number, which was supported by our officers. I actually supported that number because it was data-driven by all the economic activities which is going on within the borough. We're driving that economic activity in the borough through LEP. You can't have it both ways. You can't have higher economic growth and lower housing numbers. The two just don't match. And I think you need to be more honest with the public. Mr. Mayor, so I can't support that. I actually voted for the higher number because I think when it comes to the inspector, he's going to railroad straight through our plans because we're ignoring the evidence which we actually have. In my job, I'm an engineer, so all my work is done by data. You don't ignore data. This is what this council was doing, ignoring data and evidence and data. So we're just leaving an open goal to the inspector. It's ironic. If you listen to the members on this side a few years ago, if we were advocating the development of Manydown, we'd have got our plan through and we'd have had about 500 homes by now on the local plan would have been signed up. It's ironic now we're going to get about 1,000 homes. And we wouldn't be arguing about all this piecemeal development that we're actually going to get on the A30 or on the east of Basingstoke. It's a terrible situation. And I hear what would the Labour group do? I mean, it was already explained by some of our Labour Labour colleagues. And the housing mix policy isn't good. The local space, green areas, we like to tighten that up. The housing affordable element is not good. what would we do? The new homes bonus money, we're not going to be spending the majority of that money on infrastructure improvements, Mr. Mayor. We're actually going to be spending it on piecemeal community projects within the areas when we've got a massive infrastructure deficit, and that deficit is actually going to get worse once this plan is adopted. I'm really disappointed. You know, I thought we could have done a lot better as a borough. I'd like to thank the officers because they've worked tirelessly throughout this, and Councillor Raphael, he's tried to move this on, but he's fallen down at the last hurdle. So, Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry I can't support this. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, it is a sad state of affairs, and I must admit I fully sympathise with all parties. But I've tried to contribute to P&I. I've tried to be constructive. In 2 to 4 minutes at a time, it's very difficult to get one's points across. I really do commend the officers and the members of P&I, the commitment, the hours that they've put into this process. But you know, it's been difficult sat in the audience as well. I am concerned by things like the fact that we have sites in the plan, that's still in the plan, that have been through DC and they've been rejected, and yet they're still in the plan. They've been rejected as not sustainable, contrary to what the plan says that the sites will be. So I question, we don't seem to be like one joined up council at times. I look at master planning. Yes, we've cottoned onto that. That's great. We're going to do it for Manydown. But we seem to be, from what I'm reading, expecting developers to work together when they sort of have sites next to each other or co-joined to come up with master planning themselves on our behalf. And to my mind, that's going to be a sort of commercially run thing by developers, and I don't really know that that's going to work. I'm concerned. Like Councillor Watts, I too am an engineer by profession. I love data. I love to have facts. I love to put a project together. I like to look at, can we afford it and what costs. So I'm extremely worried that whilst we know what we want to do as regards infrastructure, we don't know where the money is going to come from. So therefore that just gives me that edgy feeling that we're not going to deliver everything we need. I'm also concerned, it's been said by other members, that in this new draft here we've had many environmental and green references having been removed. We seem to be being easier on developers. And then neighbourhood development. Yeah, I mean, that's a great idea, but you try telling that to the people in Bramley who are working really hard and faced now with a developer who's sailed in with 200 houses. That was the allocation, and that planning application we'll be seeing very soon, I think, at DC. So that's really awkward. I also really think public consultation, we're putting this plan out, and I'm concerned that the public won't really see any changes, or they won't understand the changes. They won't see what has changed for them, so I'm not really sure what response we're going to get. And then finally, Councillor Tilbury is right, the developers are running the show at the moment. It's very frustrating. We do need a plan, but we need a right plan. We've got to get our plan right, and that's why I'm still not able to support the plan tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor West.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In trying to make sense of this fiasco, I have to kind of agree with Councillor Leake, in as much as the fact that I have to conclude that there really is a severe deficit of infrastructure in this borough. And what worries me is that where some of the housing is planned to be built is some of the areas of the worst possible deficit. I can only take heart from the fact that in this particular plan, they've left Tadley alone. But only because they've already allowed enough development in Tadley, too much development in Tadley, to happen already. And the reason that I cannot trust this administration in order to provide the infrastructure required for all this housing is because the mess that's been made in Tadley. 115 homes crammed into a small site with barely enough parking, barely enough green space. And at the 11th hour, they realise that there aren't enough school places because they didn't think that some of the people moving into those 115 homes might just have children. If that is how this borough and the county go about dealing with a small development in my ward in Tadley, how can we trust them on a site the size of Manydown? You know, I predicted this fiasco would happen. I predicted that we'd end up with such a situation in an article that I wrote in September 2012, which was widely reported upon by Basingstoke's media that we have here today. I never quite understood why or whether the administration agreed with me, because after I wrote that, coincidentally, I never went to any more of the meetings. So I never really truly understood what they actually felt about what I wrote. But I predicted that developers would be ruling the show, and I predicted that planning decisions would be open to appeal, and I predicted that the Development Control Committee would be subverted to the courts and the planning room as the developers begin to rule and control development. And that prediction that I made in 2012 is now seeing itself materialised here today. And what a plan it is as well. Contrived, piecemeal, disagreements between members of the administration. I saw this while I was in the Conservative group, and I still see it from outside the group. A divided group who can't even agree to disagree. So despite the eloquent recommendations that we have from the administration's future coalition partners here, I cannot agree and vote for the proposition for the local plan tonight. This borough deserves better, and this is a weak excuse for a poor plan which means that everyone loses. And may I just say this as well. If it wasn't for the fact that successive governments have opened the floodgates to immigration uncontrolled in this country, we would not be in that position in the first place. And that is an inconvenient reality that you can take if you want to do, or you can throw it away. But that is my position, Mr. Mayor, and that's my position. I won't be voting for this tonight. It's a very sad, sad evening when after all of this time, after being in and out of courtrooms, after spending hundreds and thousands of pounds of this borough's taxpayers' money, and we're still here in the same logjam. Mr. Mayor, I will be voting against this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Watts, I think, got us off to a good start in this debate. And I'll try and quote you accurately when you said, "We're all responsible to the residents of our wards for good planning." I totally agree. That has to be the biggest thing that any of us sitting in this chamber look for. I know as a ward member for Winklebury, and as this is my last council meeting, one I can truly say without a political agenda, that that's the thing that I stand here to try and represent my local residents. I would like to hope that all councillors stand here representing their own local residents, but also looking at our responsibilities as a council to all the residents of the borough. For me, and for my residents, the issues around the local plan aren't about whether there will be development now, thanks to the way we bought the land, or the parties opposite bought the land. We've got no choice. But it's about how that development affects the local area. And I salute the portfolio holder for his changes to improve the lives of the local residents, because it's about traffic mitigation measures. It's about the protection of local landscapes. It's about the Western Bypass. Now, a member opposite mentioned my comments in Cabinet. With his spin, at least this time the Labour Party admitted they were spinning it, but perhaps he should look around him. The nub of the issue with Manydown is that the parties opposite bought it with the express intent to build upon it. They compounded this by locking us into legal agreements with commercial property developers. So we already have a sensitive tightrope to walk between commercial property developer and planning authority. Now, we can have all the appropriate governance issues we have. We can have all the committees, but that's kind of destroyed when members opposite wax lyrical, how it's a vitally, strictly, very crucial thing about what our partners will think about what we say on Many Down, the commercial partners, but don't mention as much the local residents, if they mention them at all. Now, the Labour Party carry on and say they want to use our big assets, there's none bigger than Many Down, in order to build council houses, but refusing to say how many they want to build. We had a little bit of a gesture by Councillor Watts, the Labour one today. He showed us a little bit of leg, but he didn't quite actually get down to, this is the number of houses we, the Labour Party, believe should be built. We've never had that, ever. The whole way through 2 local plans, we've never had that. We've had your Facebook page saying that's not important, but then for the last 3 years we've had you saying that the 5-year land supply is vitally important. What's that based on? Oh yes, the target that you refuse to give us. Now, perhaps if we are to keep the residents with us and take them on this difficult planning, we should have some honesty around what we want to do. So perhaps the first step for the Labour Party is to actually say, to use some of their senior members have all the experience, professional, whatever, of commercial property development planning, to use that experience to come honest, to give us a housing number. How many houses do you want to build? Where do you want to build your council houses? How many of them do you want to build on Many Down? You passionately talk the percentages wrong for affordable housing, but you refuse to say the percentage of what? It's an irrelevant, hot air issue if you're talking about a percentage but not saying what of. Go on, take the chance. Tell us how many you want to build. Then again, as I go back to Councillor Watts again, perhaps they really are waiting for Ed Miliband to tell them what to think. Perhaps they really do honestly believe that none of them are capable of taking the decisions. Because that's what they're doing by not making their policies. Go on, believe in yourself. Somebody might, but you won't. Or are you just playing politics with this? Are you focusing on something else, members over there? Are you trying to play politics and not tell us how many houses you want? Mr. Mayor, this plan isn't perfect, but we need to listen to our people, and I mean really listen to local communities. Really listen to local communities and what they're saying about it. Not viewing prime assets, as some people in this thing, not trying to sweat them, not trying to make more assets, but listening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Steele? No. Councillor Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I seconded the motion to approve the local plan, not only because I've been involved in it myself fairly deeply, as most people know, but because I think we need to. There is a need for this local plan to go out to consultation. It's just been said, we listen to our local people. That's important. They've had a look at it once. It's come back to us. We've listened to everybody, including developers. I didn't like some of the things they said, believe you me. But at least we listen. That's democracy, as somebody said earlier on. It needs to get out into the community again to have a look at this, to make their comments before it goes to examination. I come from a military background, as you know, and this is a plan. A plan in the military is good right up until the first contact with the enemy, as some of the ex-servicemen in this room will know. The enemy in this particular case, I don't know. You can make up your own minds. It could be the inspector. It could be the developers. They sort of come in that bracket as far as I'm concerned. The point is that the plan can change. It can change because of economic circumstances in the country, the changing requirements of Basingstoke and Deane. There's all kinds of ways it can change. It can change from the thought processes of the various people involved in this chamber. It might be 60, it might be another number. But it's got the capability of changing. A 5-year cycle is not a bad number to pull out of the air. If something becomes a driver to change the plan, this council's got the power to change the plan. If some numbers need to be tweaked, if we can't get the infrastructure, I've been beating that drum ever since I became a councillor. The infrastructure's got to be the right infrastructure. If you don't get the infrastructure on some of these sites, the sites cannot be, in anybody's definition, be viable or sustainable. Now that's something we can pull out of the MPPF and bang at the inspector. If you don't get a sustainable site and development on it, you reject it. If it goes to appeal, we can hammer it that way. Get the inspector to tell us how it becomes viable without the right infrastructure. I sympathise with a comment from Councillor Overton. Sewage. We've got evidence, haven't we, in Buckskin? If the sewage system doesn't work, we know what happens. So the sewage system has to work. It's not viable. And we heard very eloquently from Councillor Taylor about the impact and the results of what can happen in those cases. The examinations in 2015. We've got to get this to examination. The consequences of that examination, I haven't got a crystal ball. Affordable housing, I'm afraid I will echo the various comments from other members of this House. As chair of P&I, I sat there and on many occasions, the Labour representatives on P&I were asked, what are your numbers? Silence. Not even a comment. It was silence. I couldn't believe it. I just had to listen. I've said enough, Mr. Mayor. I commend this motion. I support it fully. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Mitchell.
No, I think this has gone on quite long enough, Mr. Mayor. I won't trouble you.
Thank you. I've got two more speakers. I think Councillor Burgess and Councillor Round. Can I move on? Councillor Burgess first. Councillor Burgess, if you would like to stay sitting, you may.
Thank you for that indulgence, Mr. Mayor. We all know that a camel is a horse designed by a committee. Well, I love this camel. I'm going to support it. Pumps and all. Thank you.
Councillor Round.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I will be supporting this local plan. I will also be supporting Tadley. I certainly will not be standing up, making up a few stories and ranting on about immigration. Tadley is a wonderful place. Tadley is well laid out. Tadley doesn't have so many parking spaces that you should make that sort of issue. The new 115 development site is well built, and if you visit Tadley more often, you'll find it's in Tadley, not in Tadley Central, it's in Borgus and Tadley North. Thank you very much.
Councillor West. Councillor West, would you please?
Yeah.
Would Councillor West? Yes, would you please? It's his turn to speak. So please stay quiet.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for stopping him from ranting on again. And just to confirm for him, I do not live in Wiltshire, but I do spend a lot of time in Bristol.
Thank you, councillors. Councillor Raphael.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I'm afraid you're not going to get £10 for your charity. And I have to say that's been slightly more entertaining than I was expecting. I suspect, members, Mr. Mayor, that if I put a clause in the local plan denigrating Councillor West's opinions, you'd all have to vote for it, wouldn't you? We know, Mr. Mayor, why he's in a group of one. We now know he'd like to be in a country of one. Mr. Mayor, I have some sympathy with Councillor Shaw. Being a close neighbour to the Labour Party, he's heard all these loud noises and the banging and crashing and all this indignation and the roaring fire of their opinions. And he's had the bravery to look over the fence to see what on earth's been going on in the Labour Party's back garden. And he's discovered that they have no credible proposals. Well, there we are. We thought so from our distance over here, but you've now confirmed it from your neighbourly position. I can say you've described it as a betrayal of communities threatened by development. Well, they're your words. I'm sure you're right. It's a great disappointment. Imagine you're the Labour Party candidate knocking on the door, and the floating voter says, well, I know what the Conservatives want to do on the local plan. They want to keep the number as low as possible, but base it on the evidence. I know what the Liberal Democrats want to do. They've always said about 748, the number roughly like that, based upon the evidence. I know what UKIP want to do. They want to get rid of everybody in the country apart from one person. But what do you want to do, the Labour Party? And they'll be met with, and they'll just have to keep waiting, because we haven't been told. Perhaps if they know their history, of course, they'll remember that the Labour Party were very happy with 940 homes being built in the borough, and maybe that's what the Labour Party are waiting for, a higher figure, which then they can say, well, we've always wanted that figure, we just didn't have the guts to tell the public about it this side of an election. Well, Mr. Mayor, the plan is here. I ask all members to support it. I still reach out to the Labour Party, and I say one further thing. They have made a constructive comments throughout this process at P&I. I have fully respected their views. I believe they know that. That many of the things that they wanted to put forward have been contained within the plan. It's a shame they haven't got the bravery to put any constructive proposals before this meeting. It's for us to debate. Instead, we are left with this plan with no alternative, and I would ask that all members of the council support it.
Thank you. Now, recorded vote has been called by, was it Councillor Bierman? Chief Exec.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For, against or abstaining on the recommendation, Councillor Mrs Baker, Councillor Barnes, Councillor Miss Bean, Councillor Bierman, Councillor Bound, Councillor Mrs Burgess, Councillor Ms Jarrett, Councillor Mrs Court, Councillor Cousins, Councillor Mrs Cubitt, Councillor Day, Councillor Donnell, Councillor Dunlop, Councillor Miss Eachus, Councillor Eyre, Councillor Mrs Frankham, Councillor Frankham, Councillor Gardner, Councillor Goddison, Councillor Golding, Councillor Harvey, Councillor Hood, Councillor Isaac, Councillor Ms James, Councillor James, Councillor J Wardner, Councillor Keating, Councillor Leek, Councillor Leeks, Councillor Miller, Councillor Mitchell, Councillor Musson, Councillor Mrs Ossleton, Councillor Parker, Councillor Peach, Councillor Potter, Councillor Putty, 4. Councillor Regan, Councillor Mrs Reid, Councillor Round, Councillor Raffel, Councillor Sanders, Councillor Shaw, Councillor Sherlock, Councillor Mrs Still, Councillor Mrs Taylor, Councillor Taylor, Councillor Tilbury, Councillor Tomlin, Councillor Mrs Tucker, Councillor Ms Washbourne, Councillor Gary Watts, Councillor Keith Watts, Councillor West, Councillor Mrs Wardridge. Thank you. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, for 33, against 18, abstentions 4. So it's carried, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Now we go to, yes, Councillor Potter.
I just wonder if I might offer an apology to Councillor Golding. I mean, I noticed he abstained, and I could have sworn I heard him say at Cabinet he was going to vote against, so apologies to him for that.
It's not a point of order. That's fine. Okay, now let's have notice of motion. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This motion relates to our internal auditors bringing a report to Audit and Governance Committee, highlighting some serious concerns and weaknesses with the processes of awarding grants to the voluntary sector and community groups. Now, we've got complete faith that as a result of the audit report and the actions of the management team, they are actively sorting out this problem. However, what we're concerned about is that during a specific period of some time, community organisations and voluntary groups may have been treated unfairly, and that we would like the portfolio holder to agree to retrospectively look back during this period of time to check that this is not the case. Members here tonight who were on the Community and Wellbeing Committee during 2012 may remember some of the meetings we had concerning an officer recommendation to cut the funding given to 9 community schools. Now, if you recall, when the proposals came out, the schools like Fort Hill and the Vine were proposed to have their grants cut significantly or completely, while others, such as Queen Mary's College, only faced a 5% reduction. Now, the report was so contentious that head teachers and college principals came along to the committee. Julie Churcher, who was the head at Aldworth, came along and said that the council had caused an awful lot of upset and grief by announcing the cuts in funding. The council was also criticised for using a subjective method of assessing community activity at each school, which determined how much money each school would receive. Now, that was said to be over 3,000 people were involved in community activities at Aldworth, but it would still face a 50% cut in the grant, and that was not reflected in the process that they had to go through. At the time, the principal of BCOT said that the cuts were deeply unfair and that all the report had achieved was to cause more upset and grief. Now, several months later, the report went to Cabinet for discretionary grants for the arts and the culture sector. Now, a member of the Cabinet may remember it did 2 representatives come along from Carl of the Arts to speak at that meeting. They said they'd been encouraged to apply for funding for a number of years, but were once again refused. Now, they claim the report was fatally flawed, to use their words. Now, can we honestly say, are we able to say to all of these groups that we've looked at your application, that we've assessed it fairly, and here is the conclusion? What the audit report shows us clearly is that we cannot. We cannot. Because our own auditors have told us that the assessments were weak, or there were no procedures in place to ensure the legality of an organisation, or the new grants were not assessed in a fair manner. Now, I respect that is being put right. That's great, that's important. But I believe that we have to correct these issues going forward. So what we're asking for is very simple. That the Cabinet member look at those organisations that have lost out as a result of all of that, and that they are given the opportunity going forward to make fresh application, have a level playing field, and that we do this properly. You can't look back, you can't repeat the history and fix it. You know, that's already gone there, they've already suffered. But what you can do, and what we need to do, is pick up the pieces in the right way as a result of this audit report and its conclusions, and support those community groups in reapplying for the grants and reapplying for resources that may well support the very activities over the last few years that they've had cut from them. So I suggest really that's the focus of this motion for us, and I urge Council to help us achieve this on behalf of those groups, that they have a level playing field. They weren't treated fairly, the report says that, so let's treat them fairly, as we would any other organisation. And as I say, we do have complete faith that the officers are putting right what the audit report identified. That's not the issue here. It is the issue of just a level playing field for all organisations that were affected.
Thank you. Councillor Laura James.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In 2012, I had the paper come to me in relation to the community schools funding, and I had real concerns about it. So I rang some of the people that were representing the school, the head teachers, and also the principals of the 2 colleges, to ask their views. They hadn't actually seen the paper. They hadn't seen the outcomes of the paper. They knew nothing about it. I then told them what was in the paper, and some of those schools were actually going to have their funding completely cut and lose their funding completely. And the Vine School was one of those. The head teachers, as a result of that, came along to the committee, and they were exceptionally angry at the process. And then what they did is we went away and looked at it again, and the paper came back. And to be honest, it was farcical what came back, and some got funding, some didn't. Everest School got all of the funding they wanted and a little bit more. The Vine got half of the funding it needing, and lots of schools, in the one in Chinham, lost out as well, and there was no logic as to why that happened, and we as members were really concerned and asked, why was this the case? And it wasn't answered, and the process was very poor. But what concerns me is that the paper that went to Argo just recently, and it relates to our motion, was exceptionally critical. In fact, I've never seen a paper so critical of this in this council. But what happened at that committee, the webcast went down, and so if any of you really want to see that meeting and see what happened, you won't be able to because the webcast was down. And I haven't seen any minutes that relate to that. I've asked for them, but I haven't seen them. And I think that's quite damning, really, for such an exceptionally critical paper of this council. But also what worries me is I do hope that as a result of that, and I can just see what's coming, we're going to say, we're going to give it off to someone else to do. I can just see this being sent out and commissioned out and outsourced, and someone else is going to be given the responsibility of making this decision. I don't want that. I clearly don't want that. I think it's essential that this council actually administers and controls this budget. I think it's really important it does. We need to get it right. But we also need to ensure there are people that lost out. We see schools now that are not community schools as a result of this. Because of this and what happened, we see community organisations that didn't receive funding, who are exceptionally vulnerable. We don't know what their position is, whether they're still actually acting or delivering a service. And I think it's exceptionally important that we do find out. We need to find out what happened to those organisations, because we were so critical as a borough of this paper and the process. So I urge you to support this motion. I think it's really important that we do. We need to move forward, and it's good that we are moving forward. But in moving forward, the answer isn't to say we did such a bad job, I think we're going to outsource this and let another organisation do this. I think it's important that we get it right, and we look at what we need to do to get it right, and we ensure that we control and administer an essential budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gavin James.
The Labour group have a long history of contradicting themselves, though this may be the first time they've managed to do it twice in a single motion. If we summarise the motion, bullet point 1 asks us to acknowledge an audit report that finds fault as factual. Bullet point 2 offers us a selection of phrases used to describe those faults, again as factual. Bullet point 3 asks us to welcome the fact that officers are doing something about it. So we're left with number 4. It asks the portfolio holder to review previous decisions. If we accept the findings of number 1 and the findings of number 2, I don't see what will be achieved by the portfolio holder going through it all again, unless we want to upset the auditor and make out they're in some way incompetent, which I'm sure we don't want to do. And to achieve this review, we would need to take the officers that are doing the work we welcome in number 3 and set them a different task, causing much delay to putting the wrongs right. Mr. Mayor, it seems absolutely impossible to support bullet point 4 without dismissing bullet point 1, dismissing bullet point 2, and stopping bullet point 3. If you do like bullet point 1 and bullet point 2, and you like bullet point 3, the last thing you really want to do is bullet point 4. It's a very confused motion. If the Labour group simply wanted to get more money for community schools, they could have put a very simple motion saying we should review the money that goes to community schools, and I would have supported it. Instead, we've got this confused motion. Mr. Mayor, I want to be part of a council that learns from the past and looks to the future. This motion dwells on the past and clearly hasn't got a future, so I'll oppose it.
Thank you. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I must start with an apology to you. At our last meeting, I said that I wouldn't be appearing here again. The fact that we were to have an additional meeting had clearly gone through my brain without entering my diary. And I appreciate how very disappointed you must have been to see me, and he's nodding, see me turn up again this evening. Anyway, to the motion. Leaving aside the seconder's speech, in which, if you listen carefully, she actually pointed out all the many ways in which it would be sheer impossibility to carry out what's requested in Part 4 here. Leaving that aside, the motion is deeply flawed itself and in fact dangerous in its attempt to set a precedent that even the movers could live to regret, and it's flawed for two reasons and damaging for another. First, it's pointless. It asks the, and I stick with 4 because the rest of it doesn't ask anybody to do anything. It asks the portfolio holder to get officers to do a whole lot of work without suggesting any useful outcome. Assuming the work were to be done, what on earth is the benefit to anyone? Let's assume 3 years ago, the refusal or reduction of Grant A to Organisation B turns out to have been unfairly assessed. In the motion, no action is proposed. Meanwhile, Organisation B has rather wisely responded by reshaping its operations to significantly reduce its dependence on public funding and greatly strengthen itself in the process. So does the portfolio holder now congratulate them, or does he seek to return them to dependence on public funds by finding some money to recompense them for what might have been an incorrect decision 3 years earlier? The only outcome I can see from this is perhaps a bleaty message in a Labour Party leaflet to the effect that the administration deprived Charity A of £2,000, which instead was spread among charities B, C and D, who happened to be successful in that funding round. What on earth is the point? Secondly, and this is a more serious deficiency, the motion carefully, or perhaps thoughtlessly, one can never work out the difference with motions from that part of the chamber, but giving them the benefit of the doubt, let's say carefully, it carefully avoids investigating the grants actually awarded to organisations, but which, according to the internal audit report, are equally likely to have been assessed wrongly. Now, why can this be? Could it be that inadvertently overfunding a worthy organisation is, in Labour's eyes, a thoroughly good thing, just as spending the taxpayers' money on so many things is so laudable? May I say, essential and crucial. If we want officers to waste the taxpayers' resources on this kind of entirely futile exercise, let's at least be even-handed. But third, Mr. Mayor, and the truly damaging thing about this motion is the precedent it sets to see. I believe that most, if not all of us on the Audit Committee have come to very greatly value the work of internal audit, and I think that's reflected in the first part of the motion. They seem to work conscientiously and without fear or favour. Excellent. Our focus in ARGA over the last 6 months or so has been trying to get a sharper and swifter response from departments and managers to internal audit's recommendations. And I'm delighted that this is showing early and very positive results. As the late, great Bob Crosby made so clear, the long-term outcome of avoiding future errors is to increase both productivity and the quality of outcomes. Do we really want those busy managers we're chasing to fix the problem to reduce their focus on future improvements by saddling them with pointless investigations of potentially weak past decisions? Do we really want that? Some members might think that's a really good idea. I trust that the overwhelming majority, including even perhaps some of the Labour group, will, after due consideration, think otherwise. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Isaac.
Oh, sorry. Mr. Mayor, what I wanted to say has been said so much better by Councillor Gavin James, and presumably, I don't know if it's his last speech in the chamber, but one of his last speeches in the chamber. So there's nothing much more I want to add, other than to say that in response to Councillor Harvey, yes, of course, we're going to welcome fresh applications from community schools for the next round of grants for 2015/16 and onwards. And Councillor Laura James, I really have no idea what she means when she refers to these decisions being outsourced. As far as I'm concerned, these decisions are going to remain with this council, as far as I'm concerned as portfolio holder. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Musson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First and foremost, I'd like to welcome the work done by the internal audit in highlighting the manner in which the grants to organisations were decided for the year of 2014. That, of course, being the only year to which the audit report refers. At least that's my understanding anyway. This report serves to highlight the work the internal audit team do and their importance to the continual improvement of our organisation. I'm pleased to see that this matter was picked up by them so that any issues can be resolved. With that in mind, I also welcome the fact that the commissioning team are taking steps to improve on the way this matter is dealt with in the future. I am, however, a little disappointed that the motion's authors have felt compelled to include quotes from the internal audit in such a way. To use these selectively in full council meeting, in my opinion, could be taken as a criticism by any of our officers involved, and coming after the recent comments, I think it's a pity that this was included. I'm not sure what value has been added by doing so. I'm pleased there will be a review as to how we handle grants in the future, particularly as grants play such an important part as one of our functions as a local authority. It's important that we're consistent in dealing with applications for grants. It's absolutely right that we follow a thorough process that tackles all the issues raised by the internal audit, and I'm confident a review will ensure this going forward. But, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to go further. I would suggest we need to ensure that our grants are not just properly processed, but targeted to those that need them most, where they can do the most good. There are areas in our borough with a higher need, areas with probably greater social deprivation. We should be targeting long-term improvement in these areas. It's not only these areas though, because in areas outside the town, and I'd pick just some, for example, Overton, Whitchurch and Tadley, who do not enjoy the same facilities as those of you in Basingstoke, and do not always have the same means to access them by public transport. We've heard about buses. Indeed, it's more of a problem in Tadley, where due to the restrictions on house building, I know it's been said that we've had some house building in Tadley, but that's been the only one for a very long time. Because there's restrictions on house building in Tadley, we're not getting the Section 106 money that other areas enjoy. This is an anomaly that could and should be considered as part of any review, and funding to organisations should address these imbalances when being granted. I cannot support the motion. I do not believe that a review of all the decisions made over the last 3 years is necessary, practical for our officers, or beneficial to our relationships with the organisations that have accepted and appreciate their grants, as Councillor Mitchell explained. However, I'm pleased that there will be a review that improves the way funding applications are processed, and I hope my suggestions for the future targeting of that funding will be considered as part of that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've been a long-term member of the Audit Committee, and it's a shame that the webcast went down on that particular meeting, because I went on to say at that meeting that I have been supportive of the officers of this council throughout the years, and the audits that have been produced as a consequence of their work have been pretty damn good. This particular audit report was the worst audit report we have ever had in 14 years. It was a catalogue of issues raised by audit, some of which are described in paragraph 2. All to do with one range of issues. So it was the worst report I have ever seen for this council, and I regretted seeing it, because it's not the kind of report that I would have wanted or that we should ever have. I represent a ward in Basingstoke called Southam. Within that ward is a community school called Aldworth. It was called Aldworth College, now called Aldworth School. It's had a long and illustrious history, and it's done a great deal of good in the community. It had a community fund. It had a community organisation. And that community arrangement was not financed by grants, but it was supported by grants. When the older community school at that point was told that the grant towards them from the community funding arrangement was going to be cut to the point that it would make the continuation of the community arrangement in the school unviable, they reluctantly decided they had to close the community arrangement. I believe that that was an incorrect decision, and I use the word very carefully, but I do believe that there is a need to revisit some of the decisions, not for the purposes of making those same decisions again, because that's not viable, but to ensure that going forward we're using a common uniform standard with common uniform arrangements, with common uniform judgments. So on that basis, I support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you know from the question I raised at the last council meeting, I've got concerns about grants processes in the council, and so I welcome the work that internal audit did. I share all the concern of the proposer and seconder of this motion about the findings of the internal audit report. I share their wish to welcome the steps being taken to rectify the weaknesses for dealing with future applications. And I particularly share, I believe it was the seconder of the motion's view, that it's good to move forward. And because of that, I really cannot support a motion which only has one action in it, and which is retrospective and with no clear outcome. So I do want the council to move forward on its grant funding arrangements, and because I have the concern about what has happened in the past, and I do have a strong wish that we do move forward and put better procedures in place to assess grants. Because of those very reasons, I cannot support the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Keith Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I must declare an interest as the council's nominee on the Testbourne School Community Management Committee. I also have an interest in that for many years I was a quality auditor, manager and director of quality auditors. Someone I can't remember, happily I can't remember who it was, once wrote that the job of the auditor is to visit the battlefield after a defeat and bayonet the survivors. I don't agree at all with that. The job of the auditor is to lay the factual basis for corrective action and continuous improvement. It's the future. But the auditor looks at the past and the evidence in order to improve the future. I'm afraid the clause 4, I couldn't possibly support this motion with clause 4 in it, is another episode of look back in anger. Now, interestingly, I agree with everything that Councillor Keating said at the end of his talk, but that isn't what's said here, because clause 3 says that departmental management are rectifying weaknesses for future applications, and that I think was what Councillor Keating was calling for. But clause 4 is wanting to go back over specific cases when the auditors have already looked at that evidence. Councillor Harvey in moving made lots of references to level playing fields. Well, that brings to mind a recent football match when the referee sent off the wrong man. The result of that has been apologies, withdrawal of any penalties, but the result of the match hasn't been changed.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey, would you sum up, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It makes me smile that we're having a large debate over clause 4. If I could just reply to what's been said. I mean, I respect, and I think we're going to have a difference of opinion over this, but I respect what's been said by other speakers. I think the issue for some of us is the impact of what we've seen, because it isn't a criticism of officers. No one's making that, and that in some ways that's misleading to have raised that, because it isn't. You know, the audit does an important job, and where audit brings it publicly to ARGA, to have it in the public domain where it is appropriate, to have that scrutiny. That's the right way to do it. So audit have done an appropriate job here. The consequences of that are that the officers are dealing with those issues, and that's appropriate. The policy outcome of that is important. It isn't for audit to put the policy right, it's for the portfolio holders and the others to deal with those issues. And one of the things that strikes us is the consequences of what we've seen happen. You know, there are community services that don't exist anymore as a result of the changes and the result of the decisions that were made. I remember sitting in a room and being told by the cabinet member, we have it in record, the cabinet member turned around and said, oh, this process is rigorous. It could have been anything but in the context of what we've seen. And now there are grants that community schools and others have applied for, in particular one community school applied for. Because they're no longer a community school, because of the decisions that were taken, they were told you can't apply for that grant anymore because you're not a community school. So we did them out of the original fund. They can't apply for the grant anymore because of the consequences of the action. And I guess that's what I'm trying to highlight and why I welcome what the cabinet member has said on both fronts, actually, both in terms of the outsourcing element and also the future, because there are consequences to the decision that was made. And all we're asking for is that level playing field looking forward. Now, we've got examples of where the schools turned down because of the impact of that change, because of the impact of what was done. Now, that is unfortunate. That's not what we want to see. So that's why this is in two parts. And it's in two parts for good reason. Audit, identify, the officers' work and put right, we commend that, we welcome that. There is a policy point going forward in how we respectfully deal with those groups and those grants that were not given because of the flawed process that needs to be carefully thought through with future grants and future applications. And the consequences of that needs to be swept up, not forgotten about. And at the moment, our experience is, in some cases, that is being forgotten about. And other groups are still coming and saying their application process was fatally flawed. So we do need to address this somewhere. You may reject the motion tonight, accept that for what you've said. And I can see both of the other groups, you know, the major groups in the room are saying this. I appreciate that. Hearing the arguments is one thing. Dealing with the effect of the community is something else. I've got to be honest, in terms of the community schools, I mean, it's sad, you have breakfast clubs, you know, other things that have been lost because of what happened. You know, it isn't just a piece of paper and a bit of money on a budget. It is the consequence of that we're trying to identify. So I do hear what the cabinet member has said and would welcome taking up this outside of this chamber, particularly on behalf of those organisations that we're talking about.
Thank you. Yes. Well, all for this motion? And against? That's clearly failed. Yes, Councillor Parker? Oh, abstain. Thank you. Yeah, to abstain.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are many cruel regimes in power around the world today, stifling the voice of opposition by brutality, imprisonment, and killing. Often these countries are attracting inward investment on the guise of emerging economies by attracting corporate investment with the promise of cheap labour, poor health and safety standards, but higher growth, profits and returns achieved through the misery of ordinary families. The practice of large corporations relocating to these emerging economies, chasing lower production costs, justified in their annual reports as a means to support increased dividends for the shareholders, appears to be welcomed by many financial commentators. But through what tragedy and misery suffered by millions of workers. Then there are the images of children living on rubbish dumps, picking through the waste matter just to survive with no hope of their situation ever changing. While the politicians and industrialists live in unbelievable luxury, building up personal wealth. This council's treasury management policy, Mr. Mayor, the objectives, one of which being to aim to achieve the optimum return on investments commensurate with the proper levels of security and liquidity and predictability of returns. All noble aims, but with one major thing missing. I understand currently there is a bill being introduced through Parliament to safeguard against foreign aid grants being made to countries suspected of or known to have human rights issues. This local authority are proud to have been accredited a fair trade authority. This should not just mean that we give the option of fair trade coffee or tea in the coffee areas. I hear many times when I'm talking about this issue, impossible to achieve. This is something when you attend or have any discussions with investment managers, they believe it, but they know it's not true. But what is true is to try makes their job harder. And they believe if they say it often enough, we will believe it. The definition on ethics is moral principles or code conforming to a recognized standard. Yes, there will be difficulties, but that should not be a barrier for doing what is right. That is why the wording is, as far as reasonably practical, to not knowingly act in a way this council would consider unethical. In asking the Audit, Governance and Accounts Committee to develop a statement of ethical principles that could be used as a guide, not just limited to investment and financial matters, but extending it to our commissioning practices, procurement
50
practices,
seconds.
and grant funding is, I would hope, a means of branding this local authority as ethics in business. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Sherritt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Whilst I'm happy to second the motion, might I reserve my right to speak later?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I trust if nobody asks any questions about DC, this may well be the last chance that you hear from me. And everybody will welcome this, I'm sure. The question of ethical investment has, of course, been debated several times in ARGA, and each time it's been debated, ARGA have concluded that there is no sound way to devise a policy that would be possible for officers to implement with any confidence. Actually, at the last council meeting, I agreed with the chairman of ARGA when she said she'd support a motion, because it came up last time, that simply embraced the principle of not knowingly making unethical investments. However, with hindsight, I think I may have been wrong, and I think this motion shows why. The introduction recognizes the practical difficulties, but the proposition, whatever the good intentions may be, I think puts officers in not just an impractical but an impossible position. And to do that would in itself be unethical, and that's a fact, not just a play on words. Any such policy, however you define ethical and unethical, would open the door for any member, or indeed any resident or any local business or charity, to challenge almost any investment decision on a basis officers would find impossible to defend, although it would take up potentially unlimited time and resources to deal with such a challenge. Let me offer a couple of examples. The council buys a corporate bond or some other stake in an enterprise whose business appears to be entirely innocuous. A month or two later, resident A reads in her morning paper that the enterprise is actively trading with one of the brutal dictatorships that we all abhor and that Councillor Parker draws our attention to. Resident A gets on to Councillor B, who gets onto the portfolio holder, who gets onto the head of service, who gets onto the relevant investment advisor or trust or whatever. In the hue and cry that follows, resident C gets wind of this and gets on to Councillor D to point out that the said enterprise, whatever its arrangements to trade, is the main sponsor of Basingstoke Junior Bisons. Without their support, Junior Bisons, or Bison if you like the singular, will probably fold, losing us the great opportunity for local kids to enjoy an aggressive and dangerous sport, which, by the way, Resident E and Councillor F think should be banned. Meanwhile, Resident G tells Councillor H that the same said enterprise, whose European HQ is in Basingstoke, are contemplating whether to move their operations elsewhere, losing us 200 well-paid and rewarding jobs. How on earth are officers or the portfolio holder meant to sort out that mess? Business is a very complex environment. There are, of course, more obvious and less controversial cases. The most frequently cited, indeed the one cited this evening, are governments with a bad record of human rights. At least it seems obvious. The safe answer being to stick to UK government guilts. Here, however, we encounter what in theological circles is recognised as a clear warning signal. I refer, Mr. Mayor, to something called the high moral tone. I have great respect for the movers of the motion, and we all know that for Councillor Parker this has been a real issue of conscience for many years. However, there are members on all sides here who, whenever they speak on any subject, always adopt the high moral tone. Most of them, of course, are Guardian readers or Daily Mail readers. You know who you are. The two newspapers with the highest moral tone and the lowest factual accuracy. But any councillor of the high moral tone persuasion would be very quick to point out the error of lending money to a government that cuts back on benefits, introduces a bedroom tax, maintains a fleet of nuclear-armed submarines, actively supports the odious and morally irresponsible, if not thoroughly evil, house-building industry, accepts Ranel as a prospective member of Parliament, and encourages indigent citizens to waste their afternoons playing bingo. It would be almost as morally indefensible as building and operating council houses, or encouraging local councillors to attend fine dining evenings. Mr. Mayor, this motion is well-intentioned, but it encourages the whiff of the high moral tone. Oscar Wilde was against it, and so am I. This isn't a matter of conscience for me, because I see our role as looking after the needs and interests of our residents and not their morals. So I'll be voting against. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Isaac.
That's twice in one evening I've had to follow Councillor Mitchell, but sadly that will be the last time. No more. Right. Council will know my misgivings about this motion from our last council meeting. I accept that it is entirely understandable that a public body would wish to follow ethical principles in its investing of its monies, and now we've extended it now to include its procuring and commissioning of goods and services and its allocation of grants. However, I'm afraid that the devil, never the most ethical character, is in the detail. It seems to me that difficult decisions will inevitably follow, leading potentially to either a poor decision financially or an inability to make a decision that really needs to be made, or an inability to make a decision at all. As a council with over £150 million invested, this is no small matter. If our ethics test is to be countries with poor human rights records, where will that lead us to? No investment in the USA because they are a country with one of the highest annual number of judicial executions in the world? Would wording such as far as reasonably practical and not knowingly allow non-ethical investing be a suitable principle to follow, which would allow unintentional mistakes to be excused? I think what Councillor Mitchell has said points to an obvious conclusion as far as that's concerned. How far would an officer have to go in demonstrating that he or she had checked out a proposed tenant, grant applicant, service provider, to prove that there were no hidden unethical unpleasantness? Would they be prepared to take the risks involved? Most of our monetary investments are with banks and UK and European institutions and not shares in companies. So no problem there then. But we have no control or visibility on where they reinvest our monies. Would that be okay? And the same applies to diversified credit funds we're poised to invest up to £30 million in. We know we will have no say in where they invest. Nevertheless, I will vote in favour of this motion because I acknowledge the importance and value of trying to put together an ethical investment policy for this council as a public body. I hope that a form of words can be found that achieves the objective without tying our hands too much and putting councillors and officers charged with these responsibilities at risk. I wish Arga well and the wisdom of Solomon.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to start by outlining my support for this motion. It's correct when it says that some councillors have sought to ensure that consideration of an ethical dimension is taken account of when making investments. I think this is something all of us would agree with and wish for. None of us would wish to invest taxpayers' money in an unethical way, and I'm sure that's a view that our residents would agree with as well. I'm also appreciative of the fact that this motion accepts the difficulties in practical terms around it. The statement proposed for council to accept includes terms like reasonably practical and not knowingly. We must be wary of the position we put our officers in with this. What, for example, is reasonably practical? How much work should be done in terms of knowing exactly where our investments are? So much is done via third parties, for example. Arga has just, rightly in my view, agreed to a new Treasury management strategy, which potentially opens this up further. The truth is, we have a fine balance to draw here. We have to balance getting a good return on investments that will help us to keep council tax frozen for a fifth and a sixth year, with investing ethically and the position in which we place our officers. All these things must be considered, as well as keeping the process reasonably practical. The other query I have is regarding the example used of investments in countries with a poor human rights record. We'd all agree with this principle, I'm quite sure, and there may be examples on which we could all agree with little discussion here tonight. But between the 60 of us in this chamber, I have little doubt there will be grey areas. So how do we define them? Where's the clarity and who's making these decisions? Again, I'm concerned that we must not put our finance team in an unfair position. I'm sure none of us would wish to do that, and I'm sure that's not the intention of the motion. So I'm very pleased to ask Arga to develop a statement of ethical principles that could be used as a guide, as well as some practical steps to aid us as a council in not acting unethically. I have no doubt they will consider all the points raised this evening, and I look forward to seeing the results. I also have little doubt the residents of our borough will be very pleased to see us exploring this matter further, and so, as such, I'm very glad to support this motion tonight. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As we are often reminded once we're standing here at Council, we're not here to do anything other than pass or reject a motion, because if we pass it, it goes to a committee. That's what this motion asks. It's asking the audit committee to develop a set of principles or practices which will include the values of ethical investment. I believe that this motion both reflects the mover and the seconder's individual views, and I believe it also reflects the better parts of our consciousness and abilities. I'm sure there is not one person in this room who would say we should invest in unethical policies. We would all agree we should invest in ethical policies. How you do it, and who does it, and where, is very difficult. I've been a trustee of a number of pension schemes in my time, and we've had discussions of this nature there. And I was always overruled, quite commonly here as well, by the way, I was always overruled on the basis that they believed, the other people on the trustees, they believed that they were obliged only to look for the best return on the money that they were investing on behalf of others. I believe we should have a higher ideal, a higher standard, and I believe that the AGA motion for AGA should be carried so that we can look into it further. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this motion really is written, and the words are judged well, really, in the context of the debate we've heard this evening, and I do support. I know that both the mover and the second hold the view very strongly, and I respect that as much as everybody else really has stood up this evening and expressed very good, very well-meaning points. This isn't easy. I mean, what reminded me, I was just thinking through as Stuart was speaking, Councillor Parker was speaking, I was thinking, you know, for all the years, you know, I was teaching armed forces and teaching, you know, practicing diplomats the issues of ethics. You know, on one level, that is as hard as you can possibly be, as you could imagine. But the other thing I've always found fascinating on the flip side of that is the financial industry and the corporate world of how difficult they find ethics. It's always an issue, it's always a problem, it's always a perspective that's taken. And it isn't easy, I know that, and everybody knows that. But isn't it better to try and fail than to never try at all? And in this issue, on this particular issue, is it not better that we do the very best we can do to try and find an ethical policy that works? And at the end of the day, it's going to be our code, Mr. Mayor, it's going to be our principles, our values that we debate and put into a statement. And then that will be the test of how we go forward. It'll be that debate about what we define ethics as. And we need to be careful there, and we need to understand the consequences of what that means. But the motion is well judged in what it says there, and you know, we do actually have to start somewhere. I just think positively, you know, embracing the spirit of what's meant here. I do like the term that Councillor Parker used, ethics in business. Because I've got to be honest, I would love to see far more of that. I really, really would. And as an organisation with responsibilities that we have to the public person, to the taxpayer, it is to be as responsible as we can, not just for the money in the context of the value of it, but how we choose to use it. And that's really the principle I'm looking at in terms of this motion. And I wholeheartedly support it and look forward to the debate at AGA.
Thank you. Councillor Bierman, we have got 5 minutes
I
left.
won't need that, Chair, Mr. Mayor. I wish to say that I believe that Councillor Mitchell, in one of his final contributions, has found a way to engage the public. Because if the public are going to respond in the way that he outlined, we'll suddenly have dialogue and engagement to a level that I've never experienced, and I welcome it. And if that's the risk, that's a risk I think we should be taking. Sadly, I don't think it would emerge quite as dramatically as portrayed, and though I feel that it's right to express the concerns and the difficulties and the possible hurdles, I think colleagues have generally recognised that it's not an easy thing to do, but I think it's important because it sets the tone. In the absence of this motion and what might emerge from it, I'm not saying nobody cares, but I am saying it's not something that is in the forefront. If we have set some sort of guidelines, then it's something that will be taken into consideration at an earlier stage, at a higher level than might otherwise occur. I appreciate, again, we have massive difficulties sorting the wheat from the chaff. We would have that in the UK investments, let alone worldwide investments. But let's give it a try. Let's show that we're willing. And if we run against insuperable snags, we might then have to vary the scheme. Nothing's set in stone. We can learn by mistakes if they occur and do better, but at least let's try it. I think we're obliged to do it. As several people have said, it's a question of having a higher way of going about without being holier than thou, as was suggested earlier. Of going about things than commerce and business might do. I think we are a different body, we're a public body, and we should be doing it in that way for that reason. Thank you very much. I hope you will wholeheartedly support the motion.
Councillor Regan, 3 minutes left.
Thank you. I will be brief. I'd like to congratulate Councillor Parker on his speech. I think it's the best speech I've heard him make since I've been back on the council. He should almost be in Labour Party with a speech like that. But
I'll leave that. But to try and, I mean, we need ethics in business, especially the banking industry. You all know what's happened in the banking industry. They've been totally lost all sense of ethics. I mean, it reminds me, going back to days when Barclays Bank used to underwrite the apartheid regime, and before Nelson Mandela was in jail, and before they all lauded him as a saint. So there is a real hypocrisy in this. But so we need strong ethics to make sure our investments are okay, because we are a public body. But I've got one real suggestion. We can really get a great public return on our investment would be to buy and run a municipal bus service.
Thank you. Councillor Shaw, you got two minutes, just over 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm always a little bit distrustful of debates in which one side of the argument says something that is impractical or impossible, or there's legislation or guidance against, because I've encountered so many instances over the years that I've been on the council where actually the debate has shifted, and something that at one stage seemed impossible or illegal or impractical, actually turned out to be good and beneficial. And I think actually we're in danger of making the issues seem a little bit more complicated actually than they are, because if you think about investment decisions, okay, there are the aspects of balance sheets, equity ratios, economic growth and so on, all those sort of monetary considerations in an investment decision, but there are also matters of judgment. Judgments about managerial competence, about the ideas and intellectual property that a business has, and to what extent that will enable a business or an economy to develop or grow. So there are issues of judgment in any investment decision, even one that is not taken ethically. And all this motion is about really is the virtues of consideration, discretion, balance, and also of accountability, and actually the council standing up for judgments that it makes and believes to be the right ones, some of which will turn out to be wrong, but which will have been taken in good faith. And that is the fundamental reason why actually this is the right motion at the right time. I think it's easier perhaps than we perhaps care to suggest. And I think we might be surprised at what we can achieve by progressing this motion forward.
Thank you. Councillor Sherritt, reserved to speak, so please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try not to take up too much time. Certainly, when I last spoke on this matter, I fully recognised the difficulty member colleagues would have, and indeed tried not to set a tone that would constrain officer colleagues in seeking to properly interpret and implement a statement of ethical policy. However, I challenged us all then to think about doing not what is without challenge or easy, but to do what is right in setting the tone for this organisation. This motion seeks your support to start the journey in defining our statement of ethical principles for all of our business dealings. I might be wrong, but I actually trust the good sense and vibrant debate within ARGA to take that challenge on. I think they can develop practical measures, a statement of ethical principles that sets the tone and virtue of what we're seeking to achieve. I think we can do that in a way that doesn't seek to constrain our officer actions. At the moment, there is more information available at the touch of a button about all investments, organisations and their dealings than we've ever had before. There are lots of organisations, including investment organisations, that advise us on the trend of where ethics exist and where they do not. Similarly, in terms of conducting of business and indeed the trends within conducting of government in countries. We're not asking them to go to the nth degree to take a risk because they cannot find the right information. We're just asking them to take on board the spirit of an ethical principle statement, which we can guide and use in our business dealings. We need to send an unequivocal message to those seeking to apply or benefit from our public funds that we manage on other people's behalf, that our collective intent is sound, clear, rational, and with due regard to ethical considerations. I fully accept that we might not get it right first time. I fully accept that in the future, when we're not as calm and rational as we are tonight, we might even look to future opportunities to play games and embarrass each other when things slip up. And something comes out where we see that maybe one or other of us have acted unethically. However, it shouldn't take away from the fact that a statement of ethical principles in our business dealings should be a guide for us all. The intent is there, the practicalities are obvious, and we need to take those into consideration. And I thank members for sharing some of their views on those practicalities tonight. I look forward to wrapping them up in the discussions we have in ARGA. In spite of all of this, I'd rather have my name against a motion as having tried and failed rather than not to have tried at all. I thank you all for your comments tonight and urge you to support this motion.
Councillor Parker, to sum up, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, first of all, I would like to thank Councillor Sherritt for giving me the support in moving this motion, not only just this evening, but during the time when we were looking at what would be a sensible and practical wording. This journey for me, Mr. Mayor, started many years ago. In fact, I can recall attending an investment seminar in 1970. It was at Newbury Racecourse, in actual fact, when I timidly asked of the fund managers making the presentation, when would they ever consider ethical funds? The response being from the top, never, if so, over my dead body. Well, some decade and a half later, I attended to the same company at their offices in St Mary's Axe, and that same fund manager was then giving a report on the growth and the performance of ethical funds. We have ethical funds are there. It is not impossible. We have a choice. And I'd like to ask, let's not bury our heads in the sand. Let's not turn the collective blind eye. Let's not shy from attempting to do what is right. And I would therefore ask members to support this motion. And in order to be considerate towards them and to allow them to also shine, Mr. Mayor, I would ask for a recorded vote.
Thank you. Recorded vote has been called. Chief Executive.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Mayor, 4 against, abstain. Councillor Mrs Baker, Councillor Barnes, Councillor Miss Bean, Councillor Bierman, Councillor Bound, Councillor Mrs Burgess, Councillor Ms Sherritt, Councillor Mrs Court, Councillor Cousins, Councillor Mrs Cubitt, Councillor Day, Councillor Donnell, Councillor Dunlop, Councillor Miss Eachus, Councillor Eyre, Councillor Mrs Frankham, Councillor Frankham, Councillor Gardner, Councillor Gosden, Councillor Golding, Councillor Harvey, Councillor Hood, Councillor Isaac, Councillor Ms James, Councillor James, Councillor Joe Ordner, Councillor Jones, Councillor Keating, Councillor Leek, Councillor Leeks, Councillor Marks, Councillor Miller, Councillor Mitchell, Councillor Musson, Councillor Mrs Ossleton, thank you, Councillor Parker, Councillor Peach, Councillor Potter, Councillor Putty, abstain, Councillor Reagan, Councillor Mrs Reid, Councillor Round, Councillor Raffel, Councillor Sanders, Councillor Shaw, Councillor Sherlock, Councillor Mrs Still, Councillor Mrs Taylor, Councillor Taylor, Councillor Tilbury, Councillor Tomlin, Councillor Mrs Tucker, Councillor Ms Washbourne, Councillor Gary Watts, Councillor Keith Watts, Councillor West, Councillor Mrs Waldridge. Thank you.
Councillors.
Mr. Mayor, it may have been carried. Mr. Mayor, 48 for, 1 against and 8 abstentions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Now we come to item 12. I haven't received any questions. Item 13, receive or block the minutes for report.
Councillor Mrs. Baker, Councillor Reid.
Yeah, Councillor Mrs. Baker, can you identify where you'd like to speak and which page, etc., please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, my question is on the minutes of the Cabinet meeting on page 4664. Which is on the back of the amendments and additions. And my query is that this set of minutes don't appear to show councillors who were also present at the meeting, although clearly the content of the minute demonstrates that there were visiting councillors present. So I would seek a correction of that, please, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, that will be done.
Councillor
Councillor Reagan.
Thank you, Mayor. Mine's item 13 on page 4650. It's regarding my motion at the last full council in the council minutes. And my question is to the chair of P&I, Councillor Paul Miller. I'd like to thank Councillor Miller for being in correspondence with me via email about progress in the motion regarding inviting the managing director of Stagecoach and the cabinet member from the county to the P&I committee. But my disappointment is that it's been arranged for the 25th of July, and bear in mind that's the school holidays, etc., and a lot of other people being on holiday, and it's a long way away, and we're in a major crisis on the bus service. I mean, we're all getting kicked. I mean, I'm going to ask a question in a minute. Don't worry, I'm going to ask a question. So I'll just outline the case. They're in a real crisis now, the buses now through Stagecoach is inept actions. I would ask, my question to Mr. Miller is to reconsider his decision to invite them to the 25th of July, but to invite them to the P&I on the 24th of April. Thank you.
Councillor Miller.
For a start, I don't pick dates of when the P&I sits. We also, after my letter that was sent to the two gentlemen involved, there's been no reply as to whether they would be available. I understand that one of them may not be able to come to the July meeting anyway, let alone the April meeting. The way I organized this, I wrote the letters of invitation. They went out in due time. The officers then advised me, and I have taken that advice, that we can't just ask these gentlemen to come into the P&I meeting. The P&I needs to understand why they're coming. That hasn't been prepared. The P&I committee has to agree what they want to address to these gentlemen. That has to be done in April. The P&I is not being convened until April. Then we can then allow these gentlemen to come in July. They are being asked to prepare a presentation, but they have to gear it on what the committee would like to discuss with them. So they have to make this presentation. That is all. And by the way, I understand the question, Mr. Mayor, but that is not a matter of detail within the minutes of the meeting. That is a subsequent action.
Supplementary question, please.
Well, we can all hide behind bureaucracy, can't we? But the point is, my constituents have not got a bus service. Half of them have got a bus service. They're isolated on a Sunday. And so the question is, will he... Well, I'll think about it in a minute. Will he inform me which of the people you've invited to 10 and 25th is not coming? Is it Mr. Dyer from the Stagecoach?
As I stand here, I have absolutely no idea, Mr. Mayor. I have not had a reply from either of them.
Thank you. Now I have got... Councillor Round.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate we're on item 13 of the agenda, but I would like to quickly reverse back to one of the earlier items on the agenda. I can't remember which one of the many houses I've left my checkbook in, so I'd like to hand over pledged to kickstart the buckskin.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Round. That's really lovely. Now I am going to really take on block the minutes. So is that agreed? Thank you. Thank you all, and have a safe. Yes, Councillor Keating.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I apologise for interrupting you. You were asked earlier if we could have a collection. Could you perhaps tell us what arrangements are going to be made? You were asked earlier to to allow a collection, and what arrangements are you going to make for that to happen tonight?
We are going to send a note
With the arrangements for all members.
for all the members, and they can contribute on that. Yes. Okay. So anyway, this has been my last full council. Thank you all very much. And safe journey home.